Chapter 97. That's right. Aladdin took a deep puff from his pipe and blew out a fist-shaped smoke ring. His expression was very rich as he said in a deep voice, "At that time, there were 20 terrifying ogres surrounding me. Their arms were as thick as my waist, and they were holding huge spiked maces in their hands. When they swung their maces, the sound of the wind was very frightening. If I was careless, my head would have been smashed by them." He held the pipe and gestured the size of the spiked maces. He even pretended to wipe off the cold sweat on his forehead. Suddenly, he lowered his voice and said, "The situation at that time was very dangerous. I tried my best to dodge their attacks, and a few of them just brushed past my clothes. But thank Lady Luck, these slow guys didn't hit me at all. Instead, I used my short sword to cut their thighs. I found a wooden barrel in front of me. So I ran with all my might. This difficult battle lasted for a long time. Finally, these heavy guys couldn't take it anymore and I knocked them down one by one. Yes. After that, I calmly left the ogre's nest." It had to be said that his storytelling skills were very good. Although Soren knew that he was bragging, he couldn't help but feel that it was very interesting. Even Gloria, who was beside him, leaned over and listened with interest. With the thickness of the fat on the ogres' bodies, it was already good enough that the two short swords in his hands could cut through the fat layer. 20 ogres, after deducting the fat, were at most 4 or 5. Perhaps because of their small size, the halfling liked to use exaggerated metaphors to describe himself. Vivian, who was beside him, listened very seriously. The little girl liked to listen to stories, especially when the halfling was about the same height as her. It was very immersive to listen to stories. Stories about halflings were very popular among human children because they could imagine themselves as halflings in battle. Time passed quickly like this. Perhaps it was because of the lively halfling, the journey was much more cheerful. From time to time, he would tell stories of his adventures to Vivian. Although the content of the stories was exaggerated, it was obvious that he had been to a lot of places and encountered a lot of difficult characters. Soren couldn't determine his profession level, but it seemed that Aladdin should be a grade 3 rogue, and he seemed to be good at making mechanisms and alchemy. He also gave Vivian several exquisite gadgets. They were all made with alchemy and mechanical techniques. The little girl received more and more gifts. The guards of the caravan gave her quite a lot, and so did Gloria. Even Gloria's mother, who was mean and unscrupulous to Soren, also gave her some small gifts. Now, the little girl had a special multidimensional bag, which was filled with all the gifts she had received. In the evening, Soren untied the horses and let them graze while he began to prepare dinner. Aladdin volunteered to let them have a taste of the food made by a gourmet who traveled around the world. Soren missed the food made by the halfling. He looked at Vivian's longing expression and immediately nodded in agreement. There was a river next to the foothold. The halfling quickly took out a few sticks from the bag and assembled a fishing rod in the blink of an eye. He first set up a campfire, took out a small pot and put water in it. He also took out some mushrooms and spices. "I picked this up in the woods today. I've tasted it, and it's delicious." Aladdin poured some fine salt into the pot, then took the fishing rod and walked to the river. He said as he walked, "Wait for me for a while. When the soup is boiling, I'll catch the fish. I'm a fishing master in my hometown." Vivian curiously followed him, and Gloria also came to the side with great interest. Aladdin looked at the little girl beside him and smiled. "Do you want to give it a try? I have a fishing rod here." "Okay." Vivian quickly nodded her little head. So, the halfling took out a few more sticks, reassembled a fishing rod, and handed it to the little girl. Vivian held the fishing rod with her little white hands, and imitated Aladdin's action of throwing the bait into the river. The halfling looked back at the campfire, then sat by the river and continued to brag, "In my hometown, the Shire, there's a fishing competition every autumn. The first place gets a very good prize. Basically, as long as I'm in my hometown, I'll definitely be the champion of the fishing competition." So when those guys heard that I was going on a trip, they were immediately overjoyed. They were eager to win this year's fishing competition. Soren didn't know how many times the halfling bragged that he was the champion of the fishing competition. He probably won the fishing competition before, but it was hard to say whether he was the champion every year. Moreover, the fishing competition was part of the halflings' autumn celebration. Every halfling village would hold such a competition. The halfling Aladdin was still talking about his most glorious achievements and how many fish he had caught. Vivian's fishing float moved a little. The little girl excitedly held the fishing rod and whispered, "Sister Gloria, come here quickly." The fish took the bait. Gloria didn't seem to have fished much. She walked behind her with great interest and whispered, "Don't worry, wait for a while. It hasn't taken the bait yet." The noble northern witch naturally didn't prepare food by herself. If she needed to eat fish, someone would definitely send it to her immediately. "Don't worry." Aladdin looked over and was immediately surprised. "Lucky little girl, slow down. It looks like a big fish." Soren was preparing to roast the fish over the fire. Suddenly, Vivian's yelling came from the river. Her little body was dragged forward by the fishing rod. Gloria, who was next to her, immediately reached out and hugged her. Then, both of them began to yell. The halfling on the side also shouted, saying something like, "Slow down. Slow down. Slow down. Slow down." Soren looked over with a smile, then slowly walked over. Vivian's cute little face was flushed red, and her breathing was a little messy. She was holding a 30-centimeter long fish tightly with both hands. She raised the fish in front of Soren and said excitedly, "Brother, look." Vivian caught a big fish. The fish was probably close to 12 pounds. Such a big fish had a lot of strength in the water. It wasn't easy to catch it, and the fishing line would break if you didn't control it well. Soren glanced at Gloria next to him. After seeing the smile on her face, he immediately understood that she had used the magician's hand. Otherwise, it would be impossible to catch it without some skill. Generally, it was difficult to catch fish that weighed more than 5 pounds. Soren reached out and touched her little head. He took the fish and said, "Vivian, good job. It's up to you today." The little girl nodded happily. Her little face was full of joy. She was always easy to satisfy. As long as it was something interesting, it could make her happy for a long time. Soren pulled out his dagger and cut open the fish's belly. On the other side, Vivian was still fishing very seriously. She whispered softly, hoping that the fish would take the bait quickly. She didn't know if she was particularly lucky, but she actually caught a second fish immediately. On the other hand, Aladdin, who had been bragging for a long time, didn't even take the bait. When the little girl caught the third fish, he finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He put down the fishing rod and jumped into the river. After a while, there was no trace of him. Then his head popped out with a big fish in his hand. He raised it high towards Vivian and laughed, "I caught it. I caught it." The two people present were a little speechless. They didn't have much to eat. The halfling put away the fishing rod. Seeing the little girl's unsatisfied look, he simply gave her the other fishing rod. Then he began to prepare dinner, taking out bags of seasonings from his pocket. Some of them were used to make fish soup, and some were used to grill fish. Soren even smelled a fragrance similar to cumin. The halfling was a race that was best at cooking. Many rare seasonings were only available in their hands. It had to be said that his cooking was really good. This meal should be the most delicious meal Soren had ever eaten since he came to this world. Vivian's little belly was bulging, and Gloria also tasted a lot. It seemed that his title as a gourmet was not a bluff. His cooking skills were definitely at the level of a master. It was the third day of the trip. Soren met a halfling gourmet. His destination was the mountain fortress, and he was going to try the Iron Dwarf's blazing fire wine. They would travel together to autumn-fall, and then part ways. Chapter 98. Next to a warm bonfire. Aladdin was preparing some snacks for supper. It was actually sliced meat, sprinkled with spices, and roasted. In the storyline, the original halflings were people who knew how to enjoy themselves. They would spend at least half of their wealth on making themselves more comfortable. Moreover, the halflings would not be adventuring for a long time. They would often choose to return home and retire after making a fortune. Vivian couldn't eat anymore, and Gloria also burped, which was a rare occurrence. She then entered the carriage with a slightly red face. Soren's appetite was very good. The stronger one's physique, the better their digestive ability. His appetite had doubled compared to before. For example, he now carried jerky with him, mainly in case he didn't have time to cook during a battle. He could just use jerky for a period of time, and it would be much better when he broke through to grade 4. At that time, his endurance would be greatly strengthened, and it wouldn't be a problem even if he didn't eat for 7 or 8 days. He knew a little about barbecue. The two sat by the bonfire and ate meat. Perhaps it was because there was a gourmet beside him, but Soren unexpectedly unlocked the cooking skill. Now, it was already 20 points. There were many types of basic skills. In addition to the ability to directly affect combat, there were also skills such as forging, cooking, tailoring, and so on. These skills weren't very useful, and very few people would specifically train in them. Weapon forging and armor forging had their limits, and if one wanted to create rare-grade equipment, they had to use alchemy. Among them, the most typical was the wizard robes. Many high-grade robes required special materials, such as the tough spider silk from the Underdark. Ordinary tailors would not be able to make clothes with this kind of spider silk. As for wizards themselves, you couldn't expect them to be proficient in the art of sewing when they already had so many things to learn. Therefore, high-grade rare-grade items had always been very rare. Aladdin leaned against the carriage and smoked his pipe. He also handed a small bag of tobacco to Soren and said with a smile, "Try the tobacco of the Noridotus family. This is the best tobacco in the north of the Shire." Soren didn't refuse. He reached out his hand and lit it up. He basically didn't drink. When necessary, he could use tobacco to ease his pain. Sometimes, he could use it to distract himself from his injuries. The tobacco grown by the halflings was hard to buy even if you had the money. It was something that many wizards were passionate about. When lit, it would have a faint fragrance that could help to refresh one's mind. The effect was similar to Gloria's incense, but tobacco was mostly a hobby of male wizards. The night gradually deepened. The halfling spread out a blanket, then rolled it up and went to sleep. No one knew if he was asleep or not. After all, it was difficult for rogues to fall asleep. Rogues had the most important tasks in the adventurer team. They had to be vigilant at all times. If they were ambushed, rogues would definitely be the first to be questioned. That was why for a long time, rogues liked to travel alone because their tasks were too difficult. When they encountered dangerous terrain, they had to walk at the front. They had to deal with the traps. At night, the mages were meditating, the warriors were sleeping, and the rogues had to be vigilant at all times. When it was safe, they had to take some time to rest. It was okay to have a high-level ranger to replace them. If there were not many dangerous places, the warriors would be useless. They wouldn't even know when the enemy had sneaked in. It was still a solo activity. They could leave and stay as they pleased. It was quite comfortable. There was a faint howl from a wolf in the distance. Soren sat in the carriage to rest. Vivian pulled the corner of his clothes with her small hand. Soren smiled and touched her little head, indicating that she didn't need to enter the carriage. Although the halfling was very friendly, he still wouldn't take it lightly. Even if there was a warning circle set up by the witches, he still thought that he would feel more at ease if he kept watch at night. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to sleep well at night. The weather was getting colder and colder. Winter might come earlier this year. It seemed that it would be much colder than previous years. Aladdin gradually fell into a deep sleep. He probably didn't want to travel with them, but to be able to have a good sleep. He probably wouldn't dare to sleep peacefully in the wilderness. Soren sat upright with a blanket covering him. Occasionally, he would stand up and walk carefully, listening to the sounds in the distance. It was the sound of the wolves discovering the bonfire, but they were smart enough not to disturb it. If the wolves weren't very hungry, they would still eat wild animals as their staple food. Attacking travelers would reduce their population, and it would be difficult for them to reproduce. The next morning, Soren's body was covered with a layer of white frost. The weather was really cold. Soren, who had 20 points of constitution, didn't care much about it. However, when Vivian woke up and saw the frost on his eyebrows, her small face showed a distressed expression. She used her small hands to wipe the frost off his body. She opened her small mouth and blew on it. She held his hand and rubbed it hard. "Brother? Are you cold?" Soren kissed her forehead and smiled. "I'm not cold. This cold is nothing." The weather had really changed. When he woke up in the morning, there was a layer of white mist. Gloria frowned and whispered, "This year's winter came earlier than before." Soren nodded slightly, but didn't say anything. After Aladdin woke up, he first moved around a bit. Then he began to look for dry firewood to make porridge. He had everything he needed. After a simple meal, the group continued their journey. Perhaps because the road ahead was cleared by the caravan, they didn't encounter any monsters along the way. This journey lasted for 2 days, until the 5th day, they finally arrived at the city of Autumnfall. This was the territory of the half-elves. Half-elves were very common here. They had slightly pointed ears, slimmer and more flexible bodies than humans, and obviously more beautiful faces. However, most of the half-elves had been mixed many times. The proportion of human blood was very large, and the proportion of elf blood was reduced. The villages were similar to human villages, but there were many more arrow towers. There were many longbowmen here, more than the elves. This was because the elf strength was not as good as humans. Although they were agile, they were easy to get tired when using a longbow. Humans had enough strength, but their skills were not good. It took too much time to train a longbowman. It was far less than crossbowmen and ordinary archers. The half-elves combined the advantages of both sides. They had good strength, but they also inherited the elves' talent in archery. Almost every village here had a longbowman, and some towns could even see longbowman guards. Among all the mixed races, the half-elves had the best life. The others, such as the half-orcs, were now either slaves or wandering around. It was very xenophobic here. The half-elves were more resistant to any creatures that were not half-elves. They would look at outsiders with vigilant eyes. This was because they had been ostracized in both human and elf societies. The so-called racial harmony was just a slogan promoted by idealists. Soren and the others did not stop and went straight to Autumnfall. Finally, they arrived at Autumnfall on the 6th day of their journey. "Okay. I'm going to the Iron Dwarves." The little halfling jumped down from the carriage, waved at Vivian, who was about the same height as him, and then left freely. "Goodbye. Lovely little girl. Goodbye. Your Excellency Witch. Goodbye, fellow travelers. If you have time to travel to the Shire, I'll treat you to grilled sturgeon." Parting was a very normal thing. Even adventurers who had been together for a long time would have a time to say goodbye. There was a hint of disappointment on Vivian's face, but she quickly recovered. She smiled as she sorted out the gifts she had received, and her little face was full of joy. She actually liked the halfling because he gave her a feeling of a little friend. Compared to other children, she was still too smart and mature. So only the halfling, who looked like an adult but was the size of a child, made the little girl feel the joy of meeting a little friend. Autumnfall had the style of the elves. Most of them believed in the elven gods, and a small number of them would join other faiths. The half-elves also had their own gods, but they were very weak. They were only weak gods and could not protect them at all. Autumnfall was full of sycamore trees. In autumn, the leaves would fall, which looked very poetic. They worshipped the legendary immortal bird, so they also liked sycamore trees very much. There were many names for the immortal bird. The monks liked to call it the phoenix, the priests called it the sunbird, and the wizards named it the arcane ashes. It existed during the Arcane Empire. After that, it was rare to see it. It was rarer than gods and more powerful than dragons. It was said that the fire elemental god, who had great divine power in the elemental plane, extended an olive branch to them. These beautiful and deadly creatures had long left the world. Legend said that they would leave behind gorgeous flames in the sky when they flew over, and when they landed, everything would turn into ashes. The flames on their bodies would only extinguish at the moment of death. This holy flame could cause hundreds of points of holy fire damage per second. So they were beautiful but could not be approached. There were two landmark buildings in Autumn Fall. One was the statue of the immortal bird in the central square, which was 30 meters high and more than 20 meters wide with its wings spread out. The other was a dome tower more than 300 meters high. It was the site of the Autumn Fall Council, which was the internal spellcaster council of the half-elves. These were not the most eye-catching things. What was more eye-catching was an iron pillar on the dome tower, which exuded a silver-white light. It was a bit dazzling under the sun. It was the brilliance of mithril. The pillar that looked like a lightning rod was actually the legendary magic crystal cannon. In the imagination of mortals, magic crystal cannons should be very heavy cannons on the city walls, just like the cannons used by dwarves and gnomes in the story. With their poor imagination, it was difficult for them to determine what the legendary magic crystal cannon looked like. They could only imagine that a wizard would fill it with something called a magic crystal and then use a spell to trigger it to fire. Then, with a loud rumbling sound, the magic crystal cannon would knock down a giant dragon. Yes, yes. That was the feeling. It was very exciting to think about. But in fact, it was not so. The attack of the magic crystal cannon was not a parabola, but a straight-line attack. It was simply a decoration on the city wall, and one shot could kill all of them. It was born in the Arcane Empire and was used with the floating city. The maximum attack range was 1,000 kilometers, and it could destroy the target from the air. That's right. Its full name was the Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon. Chapter 99. The name sounded very tricky. But in fact, this thing had only fired one shot so far. Although it directly killed an adult black dragon, it hadn't fired another shot since then. Because it had lost the magical power device from the Arcane Empire, this Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon was now just a decoration. In the future, in order to let it fire again, the Autumn Leaf Council even opened a portal to the bottom of the sea and issued a quasi-legendary mission. One shot could destroy half a month's energy consumption of a floating city. Relying on the magic power of a wizard to charge it, at most, it would make some sparks. Although it looked like a lightning rod, in fact, it was now a lightning rod. Ugh, this kind of magical weapon was very powerful, but its practicality was very poor. It could not attack across planes and could not penetrate the distorted space. The current records of its use were mainly in the Abyss battlefield. The Arcane Empire once used it to torture the demon army. One shot of the cannon could kill an entire demon army. Except for the high-grade demons who could cross planes and escape, the low-grade demons were directly vaporized. At present, the only functioning Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon could only be found in the Clockwork Nirvana's mechanical mirror. That was the world of the construct life. It was also the only plane left behind from the Arcane Empire that was relatively intact. There were a large number of construct life that maintained the normal operation of the entire plane and at the same time, fought against a kind of fierce and powerful underground ant race. The glory of the Arcane Empire had almost dissipated. If one wanted to experience the terrible power that they once had side by side with the gods, perhaps they would have to go to that plane to know. The challenge level there was 25, which was the level of demigods and divine creatures. Any flesh and blood life would be affected by the high-intensity energy radiation after entering the plane. There were no wild plants on the surface of the Clockwork Nirvana's mechanical mirror. Instead, there were huge gears and construct life that had guarded this place for countless years. In Droll's eyes, this place was worse than hell because the natural environment that they believed in had been completely distorted. There was no trace of green in the whole world, only endless steel and a gray sky that looked like the end of the world. Soren had been there. In the end, he was lucky to come back alive. You know about it? Gloria glanced at Soren and withdrew her gaze from the super arcane crystal pulse cannon. She sighed and said, "It's a weapon left behind by the Arcane Empire. It's almost as powerful as a divine artifact. Unfortunately, there are too many restrictions on its usage." Soren nodded and said slowly, "I've heard of it. It was mentioned in the stories of the bards. It once killed an adult black dragon. Dragon clan. In this world, they were second only to the gods. They weren't beasts that could only spit out dragon breath. The dragons in this world could cast spells. While they had strong melee abilities, they were also equivalent to a warlock who was 2 or 3 levels lower. An adult dragon could release 8th circle spells, and a slightly stronger one could release 9th circle spells. They had the same number of spells as the wizards. However, the way they cast spells was similar to that of the warlocks. The types of spells they could cast were different because of the different types of dragon clan. The challenge of an adult dragon required a complete team of legendary adventurers to have a 50% chance of defeating it. Dragon disciple warlocks were the most typical profession among spellcasters. These guys had only inherited 1/3 of the dragon's abilities. Perhaps they were influenced by the stories. There was once a person who went to slay a dragon in high spirits. As a result, the warrior was trapped by a maze spell. Then, an advanced roar spell shocked the whole party. An hour later, the warrior came out of the maze. Except for the wizard who escaped by triggering a teleportation spell, the rest of his teammates were all dead. Of course, it was easy to deal with the dragon clan. For example, many white dragons' attacks were predictable. However, when faced with the cunning adult dragons, you would instantly realize that they were cheating. Even experienced adventurers would feel ashamed of their tactical arrangements. There was once a professional who calculated that if an adult dragon spell was given to a top adventurer, it could kill at least 3 legendary adventurers. Transformation, sneak attack, assassination, maze, trap, exile, monster siege, and so on. After a set of spells was used up, it would be the dragon's breath, dragon's wing attack, dragon's bite, and so on. After withstanding this set of attacks, you would have to face an adult dragon that was equivalent to a legendary melee warrior. Before Soren joined the team to slay the dragon clan, he had deduced the tactics at least 20 times. 6 quasi-legendary adventurers worked together to deduce the dragon clan's attack method for a day and a night before they finally set out to slay the dragon clan. Without any tactical deduction, without understanding the battle environment, the terrain of the dragon's nest, the distribution of monsters, and the emergency measures, there was only one result in the end, and that was the team being wiped out. There was once a demigod lich. Its way of fighting was to cast imprisonment spells. Many people thought that this was a weakness. When a group of legendary-level adventurers was about to go and kill the demigod lich, everyone was dumbfounded. It turned out that the demigod lich was just casting a binding spell, which could bind souls, out of boredom. When he encountered real danger, the first thing he did was to cast the legendary-level spell, Time Stop. In an instant, the whole group was stunned. Demon Summon, Projection, Vivisection, Dimensional Lock, Bigby's Vajrapalm, Law's Command, Shock, and Blasphemy. After a set of spells, the whole team was wiped out. Even the wizard could not escape. Since then, everyone had learned a lesson. Attacking while standing still would only lead to death. The enemy was not a stupid puppet that only knew how to play by the rules. Since they did not have the support of the goddess of luck, it was best to be more prepared. The group was ready to stay in Autumn Fall for a day. The Northern Witch obviously did not know that the super arcane crystal pulse cannon had become a decoration, but she still looked over there in awe. Soren had not slept for a few days in a row, and now he was a little tired. He first booked 2 rooms and settled Vivian in. Then he packed up and got ready to go to bed. The city was relatively safe. If Vivian was really the child of God, then it was very likely that she was the child of fear. There were some things he did not mention to Gloria, but the territory close to the elves was the forbidden area of the Dread Lord. It was difficult for his believers and followers to penetrate the elven territory. So, for the time being, they were still safe, and there should be plenty of time. Soren also came here for a very important purpose, that was, there was a special area near the Elven Kingdom. There was a legendary equipment there. And it was also a teleportation point connected to the Earth Elemental Plane. There, an Earth Elemental could bring nearly 3,000 slaughter EXP. If he was lucky, he could accumulate more than 30,000 slaughter EXP there. But he could not deal with it alone. There were a total of 4 such special areas, distributed in the Frost Kingdom, the Elven Forest, the Lava Land, and the Forbidden Cloud Sea. This was a legendary quest. The 4 places represented the elemental forces of water, fire, earth, and air. Each place had a legendary equipment, and when combined, it was a special item. It would summon the elders of the 4 elements, all of whom had a monster level of 24. Only by defeating them could he get the final item. A sealed shard of divinity, unknown. The descent of the gods not only brought destruction, but also endless opportunities. There were a lot of things in Soren's memory, but there were very few things that could be obtained. This was the easiest legendary equipment to obtain, and it was the easiest to obtain. Because the challenge rating of the Earth Elemental was only 9, it was about twice as strong as the Snake Demon from the Abyss. Because the Earth Elemental moved slowly, it was the type that Soren could easily deal with. So if he had a helper, it should not be difficult to kill them. If he encountered the Wind Elemental, he would be finished. He would not even have a chance to make a move. The sky was just beginning to brighten. Soren's door was knocked on. He almost jumped up, picked up the curved sword beside the bed, and rushed out. "What's wrong?" he asked in a deep voice. Gloria was outside the door with a serious face. She pointed outside and said, "Look." It was a snow-white world. He did not know when it started, but the outside was already covered in snow. The thickness of the snow was close to 15 centimeters. It was hard to believe that it fell overnight. How is this possible? Soren's face was also very serious. He murmured, "It's only the end of September, right? It's already snowing." Gloria raised her finger and pointed to the sky. She lowered her voice and said, "Could it be related to the sky? The gods?" Soren was not too sure. He replied, "It's possible." He had not been active in this area, so he was not very clear about whether it had snowed in advance. He estimated that no one would care too much if it had snowed. After all, too many things had happened at that time. However, snow in September was not a very good sign. Soren did not find out about many things until the gods came. If this heavy snow was really early for some reason, then it must be related to the gods who had mastered the ice and snow priesthood. Was it the Winter Maiden? Or the Ice Goddess? Didn't the chaos of the time of troubles not affect them? The events of the Frost Kingdom seemed to have started several years later. Could it be that this was already brewing? Some people were already busy sweeping the snow outside. From time to time, some people cursed the weather, especially the traveling caravans. They were almost stuck here. There was no way to leave with such heavy snow. They might have to stay here until next spring. In that case, all the money they earned along the way would be spent here. At the same time, many people were worried because it had started to snow so early. This winter would be very cold. If the monsters in the wilderness did not have enough food in advance, it was very likely that they would frequently launch attacks on other creatures. The sudden heavy snow would freeze a lot of animals to death. They might not be able to survive this winter. These small things did not seem to be serious, but the changes caused by them were very big. The natural world was always a chain reaction. P.S. It's cold. I was holding my notebook in bed and writing, but I fell asleep in the middle of the night. There are only 2 updates today. I will continue to update tomorrow. Let Fudo catch up on his sleep. Chapter 100. The natural world was always one of a kind. In the past, if there was not enough food in the wilderness during winter, they would attack other creatures nearby. Now that it was snowing more than a month earlier, the frequency of their attacks was probably higher. Although many of the natives did not have enough knowledge, their experience told them that this winter would not be too peaceful. Soren led Vivian downstairs and heard a familiar voice as soon as they reached the bottom of the inn. "Hey, hey, hey. I'm here, down there, I'm down there." Aladdin's small body could not be seen, only his voice could be heard. The innkeeper looked around and poked his head out with a smile. "Hello. Halfling. Is there anything I can help you with?" Aladdin was so angry that he almost jumped onto the table. He took a deep breath and said, "Did you see a man and a woman bringing a little girl to stay here?" "I saw their carriage from outside." Soren's mouth twitched. He walked down the stairs and said, "Aladdin. We're here. Aren't you going to the Iron Dwarves?" Aladdin was happy to see them. He clapped his hands and said, "Thank you, Lady Luck, you're still here." "How unlucky. I walked a lot yesterday and finally found a cave to sleep in. When I woke up after setting up the trap, the snow had already blocked the entrance of the cave. I dug for a long time with a small shovel. When I came out, I found out that the snow had collapsed and I was trapped under several meters of snow. I was going to continue to the Iron Dwarves, but the snow was too deep. When I stepped down, it reached my thighs. There was no way to continue. So I went back the way I came. I wanted to see if I could go to the Elven Kingdom with you. I heard that there are a lot of delicious food there." Soren looked at his legs. Sure enough, they were soaked from the soles of his feet to his thighs. Even his waist had traces of melted snow. This meant that the snow outside might be even bigger than here. The little halfling walked like a radish and a hole. The innkeeper's expression gradually turned serious. He glanced at Aladdin's height and calculated it in his heart. He said in a deep voice, "Not good. With this thickness of snow, winter has already begun." The expressions of the other people in the hotel also changed slightly. Even if the snow only reached Aladdin's knees, it was still nearly 30 centimeters thick. Looking at the snow in Luoya City, it wasn't that serious. But if the snow outside was really that thick, it would directly seal off the mountain. Winter and spring were common sayings here. During the winter season, the beasts would begin to hibernate. Many monsters in the wilderness would also rely on stored food to survive. Usually, the hungry monsters would only become active after the winter ended. Inside the tower of Luoya City, a group of strangely dressed droll gathered on a certain floor. There were elves, humans, and half-elves here. Among them, the number of half-elves was the largest, and the number of humans was the smallest. However, the leader was a tall elven droll with antlers. More than a dozen drolls sat around a rectangular table. Some of them had already quarreled because of different opinions. "Quiet." The tall staghorn droll slammed the table and said in a deep voice, "One by one, Thorn Walker, you first." The one who stood up was a pure-blooded elven droll. He looked around with his sharp eyes and said seriously, "The early arrival of the snow this year has proved that we have been too weak in the past. This is the punishment of the god of nature and the goddess of snow for endless destruction. We should have let the wrath of nature descend on those stupid humans long ago. The Grosso Plain in the southeast has been seriously desertified. The endless reclamation of farmland and destruction of the environment has caused the land there to lose its vitality. It won't be long before that place gradually becomes barren and becomes part of the desert. In the wild forest in the southwest, more than 1/3 of the trees have been cut down in the past 30 years. Nature is roaring. This is its punishment for the entire world. The early arrival of winter is a sign. If we don't do anything, there will be more terrible natural disasters in the future. I suggest that we send out the Thorn Walker patrol team to let those stupid and ignorant greedy humans who are blinded by the benefits in front of them experience the wrath of nature." "I object." An old human droll stood up and frowned. He looked at the other party and said slowly, "It's not only humans who are destroying the environment. Dwarves, gnomes, and elves are all destroying the environment to a certain extent. The world is developing with civilization, and civilization will inevitably conflict with nature. What we need to do is to find a new balance point between civilization and nature, instead of strictly adhering to the way of nature in the past and always using violence to solve all problems. A beautiful half-elf droll knocked on the table with her finger and said softly, "Recently, many people have been dissatisfied with us, especially because of the last attack. The attitude of the wizards towards us is very dangerous. The power of nature's wrath should not be abused. We should send people to warn them first. If there is no effect, we should send out patrols to drive them away. Unless it is necessary, I suggest that we don't start a large-scale war. We can arrange for apprentices to plant the trees that have been cut down as their new mission. It will take at most 10 years for the sower to turn that place into a new forest." The Thorn Walker looked at her and said in a deep voice, "Then what? Let those humans continue to cut down trees? Their demand for nature is endless. A tree needs more than 10 years to grow, but they can cut down thousands of trees in a day. In the civilization that they have developed, I only see endless destruction and disasters. Do you want to see the rise of another alchemy city?" The leader of the Staghorn Droll knocked on the table and said in a deep voice, "The disaster of the Arcane Empire cannot be repeated. Civilization can never be higher than nature. But we can't always use violence. Don't be blinded by anger. Thorn Walker. This may just be an accident. Perhaps we should do something to stop the destruction of nature by others. Not only humans, but also gnomes and dwarves. Many elves have also forgotten the ways of nature recently. Perhaps we should send people to remind them of their respect for nature. The sudden change of the season is definitely not a good phenomenon. I will send people to the Forest of Dreams to ask Sir Earthwalker. The problem now is that the sudden arrival of winter will lead to a great disaster. The animals should have stored as much fat as possible to survive the winter, but the heavy snow more than a month in advance has forced them into a state of hibernation. The monsters in the wilderness don't have enough food either. Once they run out of food, they'll attack other creatures. Animals are the first to be harmed, and then they'll attack other species. The food chain in the natural world will be unbalanced. We have to ensure that all species can continue to reproduce after winter. As long as we get through this winter, the power of nature will rebalance these creatures." The other droll nodded. The Thorn Walker also took a deep breath and said slowly, "Sir Stag, I'm afraid we can't maintain the balance with our strength. The area covered by this snow is too large. I suggest we ask for help from other droll." The tall Staghorn Droll nodded and said in a deep voice, "I know. You can start. Hawkeye Walker, go and see if the ogres in the Thorn-Tooth Highland can survive the winter. Remember, don't let them leave the gathering place. This group of stupid guys will only cause more damage. Master Deadwood, go take a look at the situation in the northern forest. It would be best if you could count how many animals won't be able to survive this winter. We must help them when necessary to ensure that their species can continue to reproduce." Orders were given one by one. Finally, the leader of the druids with antlers looked at the beautiful half-elf druid beside him and slowly said, "Your Excellency Nightingale, I hope you can take a trip to the Elven Forest. First, visit the Earth Walker and ask if there are any problems with the change of seasons this time. Then, go to the Earth Elemental Gate and see if the dragon is still sleeping." The handsome half-elf droll nodded and said, "Okay. I'll go now. Be careful." The leader Staghorn Droll said again, "There is an altar connected to the Earth Elemental Plane. Don't disturb the sleeping Earth Elemental Spirit, and don't disturb the dragon. They have bad tempers." The half-elf droll smiled and waved her hand. A beautiful nightingale landed on her shoulder. The nightingale used its beak to comb its feathers, then circled above her head and made a clear and pleasant chirping sound. Soon, only the leader Staghorn Droll was left in the hall. He looked into the distance with worried eyes and stood motionless on the balcony. Soon, snow and ice covered his body. There were migratory birds that froze to death outside. They didn't have time to migrate, so many of them froze to death overnight. The temperature became colder and colder. A few days ago, they could still wear a coat, but but now many people had to wear winter clothes. This was only the beginning of winter. If the weather continued to be so cold, it would be a disaster for humans, half-elves, and dwarves. The staghorn droll looked through the white wind and snow. He saw the crops covered in snow. There were villagers whose lips were blue from the cold working in the fields, trying to dig through the ice and snow to bring back food and vegetables. Children in thin clothes didn't even dare to go out of their houses. They gathered around the fire pit in their houses to keep warm. Nature was balanced. Those beasts and monsters were part of nature. These humans and half-elves were also part of nature. Chapter 101. Soren was also trapped in autumn fall. The snow outside was too thick, and the carriage could not move at all. Because of the cold weather, he customized a warm cotton-padded jacket for Vivian, which would take 3 days to complete. There were busy half-elves outside, and he could vaguely see Droll's figure. The snow had collapsed some simple huts, and autumn fall was rescuing ordinary civilians. Because Gloria was taking care of the little girl, he went outside the city to take a look. The snow outside was indeed thicker, and when he stepped on it, it sank up to his calf. Outside the city was a piece of farmland, but it was now a vast expanse of white. He could see men and women busy in the fields, digging through the snow to transport back the crops and vegetables that were about to be harvested. If they were not transported back as soon as possible, it would not take long for them to rot, and they would lose their source of food. It seemed that winter wheat could not be planted. The thickness of the snow was too high. In the past, winter wheat was only planted in October. Many half-elven farmers looked worried. Their talent was not very good. They were just a little more flexible than humans, but they were still just ordinary people. A peasant woman was carrying lettuce. Cabbage and lettuce were common vegetables in the south. Her fingers were cold and pale. Next to her, a girl with a cold nose was helping. Because her clothes were relatively thin, she hugged her hands from time to time and blew air into her palms. Farther away, a little boy of 10 years old was digging a snow pile. Soon he excitedly dug out a frozen bird from the snow pile, raised it high and shouted, "Sister, look! We have meat to eat tonight." The snow broke some tree trunks, and some birds' nests were directly hit. The branches were covered with ice, which looked like hanging crystals. This was the life of ordinary people. Some hunters entered the forest in groups. They were experienced enough to foresee the severe test of winter, and began to hunt some prey in advance. Maybe they were lucky enough to find some frozen animals. Farther away, some people were busy repairing houses. The poor ordinary people built thatched houses. The roof was not very strong, and it was easy to be damaged in the days of heavy snow. There were calls of birds in the sky. They had to seize the last opportunity to migrate, or they would all freeze to death here. The cold winter more than a month in advance changed a lot. It forced animals to enter hibernation in advance, and it also disrupted people's farming plans. Crackling sounds could be heard. Soren stopped in his tracks. He raised his hand and opened his palm. Hailstones the size of rice grains fell down. The noise became more and more intense. The farmer woman in the distance shouted, and the 2 children ran to her side. The little boy even fell on the snow. The falling hail was getting heavier and heavier. The farmer woman didn't even care about the vegetables she had dug out. She used her body to protect the 2 children and ran towards the house in the distance. Traces of pain could be felt. Soren raised his head and looked at the sky. The hailstones were getting bigger and bigger, from the size of soybeans to the size of pebbles. Someone cried out in pain in front of him. He dashed out and caught the 2 children in his arms. He said in a low voice, "Hurry up and find a place to hide." The farmer woman didn't have time to thank him. She staggered and followed him. Her forehead was hit by a pebble-sized hailstone. There were bruises on her head. The village was full of curses. Soren put the 2 children down. He frowned and looked at the hailstones outside. It sounded like someone was knocking on the roof. Some people's faces were bruised, and there was even a trace of blood on their forehead. The hailstones didn't last long. From the size of rice grains to the size of pebbles, it only took about 10 minutes. People walked out in fear. They looked up at the light in the sky, and then returned to the fields to harvest the crops. Soren left a bag of jerky for the two young children, and then followed the road into the forest. The familiar road was no longer in sight. The snow covered everything, and many weeds were covered under the snow. He saw Druid's figure, leaping through the forest with incomparable vigor. Although these droll were annoying, they weren't bad. Many droll had been working hard in the desert, trying to transform the desert left behind by the Arcane Empire into an oasis. This process had been going on for thousands of years. However, the efforts of several generations had only completed less than 1%. The thousands of kilometers of desert was still filled with yellow sand, and the ancient cities that had sunk under the quicksand were still emitting energy radiation. Only some plants with particularly strong vitality could still grow. It was easy to destroy the environment, but it would take countless years to repair it. Soren's attitude towards the droll was very complicated. Sometimes he wanted to kill them, but sometimes he felt that they were great. Especially when he saw the oasis built by the droll in the desert. The green color that represented the traces of life under the yellow sand was really shocking. They were very important in the eyes of the desert people. Soren saw more than once the desert people kneeling on the ground and kissing the ground where the tree shepherds walked. The snow had begun to eliminate the first batch of old, weak, sick, and disabled people. Only the strongest creatures could survive the harsh winter. Soren frowned more and more as he walked forward. The road to the Elven Kingdom was completely covered in snow. Carriages were basically useless, and they had to walk all the way to get through. It was impossible to wait until the snow melted. They would have to wait until at least next year in such cold weather. Soren couldn't afford to waste so much time, so they had to hurry through the snow. Vivian's small body couldn't walk in the snow. She didn't have enough strength, and Soren's heart ached. It was the only way. He had to carry Vivian on his back. The snow path was more than 100 kilometers long, and it would take them a long time. He just didn't know if Gloria could handle it, but she should be fine as a high-grade witch. There were many spells that could be used. By the time Soren returned, it was already afternoon. Aladdin was standing at the bar, bragging. There were a lot of guests around him, and from time to time, people would laugh and ask him to have a drink. When he saw Soren, the halfling's face was already flushed. This guy must have been a storyteller before. It was a pity that he didn't work as a bard. Otherwise, he would have earned a lot of tips along the way. Many halflings like to brag, and they wouldn't get angry after being exposed. At most, they would argue back. Their storytelling skills were very good, and they had interesting pastimes in their free time. Even the owner of the inn was listening with great interest. Aladdin was not completely bragging. He had more experience than many people. At the very least, he was able to accurately describe the height, characteristics, and habits of the hill giant. He even knew its habitual attacks. Of course, the main purpose was to prove how nimble he was and how he could escape from the hill giant's attacks. After that, he was able to make the hill giant run in circles. As for killing the mountain giant, there was no need to think about it. It was really difficult to kill them with those two small daggers. Under the tavern's guests' cheers, the small Aladdin danced on the long table. It was a very cheerful clapping tap dance. It was said that if he danced well, he could hook up with cute baby-faced halfling girls. The people around couldn't help but clap their hands and follow the rhythm. The already lively atmosphere suddenly became a lot more lively, and the owner of the inn even wanted to hire him. 3 days passed quickly. During this time, Soren was trying his best to memorize spells. Gloria seemed to know that he was learning spells, and she intentionally or unintentionally gave him some pointers. However, this mysterious northern witch obviously didn't know that Soren was already a rank 5 wizard. Soren didn't want to surprise her too much and cause unnecessary trouble. After all, a rank 5 wizard appeared in just half a month, which was even more frightening than Vivian's amazing talent. It was better to wait until the opportunity came. Soren successfully memorized a level 2 spell, Brute Force. This spell could temporarily increase his strength by 4 points. Together with the ogre bracers, it could increase his strength to 18 points, which could make up for his lack of attributes. Unfortunately, it could only last for about 10 minutes. However, a battle would last about 10 minutes. With the buff spell, he would have no problem facing the ogre head-on. Low-grade wizards had very few spell slots, so he could only calculate how to use them. He used invisibility to save his life, and brute force to fight. The number of spell slots for wizards above grade 3 began to increase substantially. On the day of their departure, the little halfling actually followed them. He had a good time in the inn. Every day, someone would treat him to a drink. Soren thought that he would stay in autumn-fall. "I'm a gourmet." Aladdin frowned as he moved forward in the snow. He then said, "How can a gourmet stay in one place? I've tasted all the delicious food here, so naturally, I have to go to the elves' place." Gloria seemed to be a little unaccustomed to it. Noble witches rarely traveled by themselves, let alone in a snowy environment. Soren wanted to help, but he couldn't. He was carrying a half-cloth bag on his back like a backpack. Inside it was little Vivian. The little girl wrapped her arms around Soren's neck with her little white hands and leaned her little head on Soren's shoulder. Her soft breathing was a little itchy, and from time to time, she would kick her little feet and spread her palms to catch the falling snowflakes. At first, she was very energetic, but later on, she became a little lazy because there was a vast expanse of white snow everywhere. After walking for a while, the northern witch was finally a little tired. She bit her lip, stubbornly looked at the others, and then gave herself a buff. After all, spellcasters were more delicate. Gloria, who had been blessed with lightness technique, immediately walked with light steps, leaving only shallow traces on the snow. It seemed that lightness technique was even better than lightness technique. The flying spell didn't last very long, so it wasn't suitable for long-distance travel. The cold wind in the sky was also troublesome. It must be combined with a protective spell, otherwise, the witch's body wouldn't be able to withstand it. The whistling cold wind blew. Leaving a row of footprints on the snow, the group gradually entered the forest. The wind and snow quickly erased the traces they left behind. Chapter 102. Soren didn't walk very fast. It took them an entire day to travel 30 to 40 kilometers, especially after entering the forest. Their speed was greatly reduced, and it would probably take them 2 or 3 days to reach the Elven Kingdom. Vivian hid her little head behind Soren's back, but her face was still red from the cold wind. Aladdin didn't have the energy to talk, so he just silently followed behind them. The only ones who had it easy were Soren and Gloria. The former had 20 points of constitution, while the latter had the buff from her spells. Evening. They camped in a leeward valley. The little Vivian came down and stretched her arms and legs, then helped Soren set up the tent. However, she was small and weak, so she was basically just a bystander. The halfling sat down on a rock and took a while to catch his breath before starting to get busy. They used some dry firewood to make a fire. Some level 0 spells were very useful at this time, and soon there was a trace of warmth around them. Soren sat next to the fire and barbecued meat, while Gloria sat quietly and rested. The halfling seemed to have recovered some of his strength, but he was still a little quiet. He held a pan and fried mushrooms. Vivian stood behind Soren and massaged his shoulders. The little girl was very obedient, but unfortunately, she didn't have enough strength to feel anything. When she saw the tired Gloria, she immediately went over and massaged her. The halfling was very happy and thought that Vivian would also come over to give him a massage, but unfortunately, he was ignored by Vivian. The temperature dropped very quickly. It was now close to 0 degrees. Soren stretched his body and took off his clothes. The 2 people next to him were shocked, especially Gloria. She looked at him as if he was an idiot. Soren just smiled and waved at Vivian, indicating that he was fine. Then, he walked into the snow and covered his body with ice and snow. In the end, other than his head, his entire body was covered in ice and snow. Gloria and the halflings' mouths turned into the shape of the letter O. They almost wanted to say, "Are you crazy? This way, I can train my resistance to the cold." Soren's face was slightly pale, mainly because of the cold. 20 points of extraordinary constitution. He could already take the initiative to train some low-level resistance talents. In the future, when he went to higher-level places, especially some areas in the abyss, the degree of coldness there would be much higher than here. Right now, he was just training in advance. Extraordinary constitutions had adaptability, and under special circumstances, it was highly possible for them to grasp the corresponding additional specialties. Half an hour passed quickly. When Soren's lips turned slightly blue, a row of data appeared: successful training. You have received 12 points of frostbite. You have developed a slight resistance to the cold environment. You have obtained information about minor cold resistance. Hoo hoo hoo. Soren pulled away the ice and snow and ran to the fire to warm up. At the same time, he took out a bottle of healing potion and whispered, "You don't have to worry about me. I'm not crazy yet. This is just a special training method. I just met the training conditions. There are also some professions who will train in extreme environments. I just happened to meet this condition, 12 points of frostbite. An ordinary person would almost freeze to death. After all, being buried in ice and snow for half an hour was not a joke. Do you want me to give you a resistance enhancement?" Gloria looked at Soren with a strange expression. She really didn't agree with his self-abuse behavior, but she had heard of some professions who trained in extreme environments. Most of them were professions like monks. She had never heard of rogues who needed to face extreme environments naked. Soren shook his head and slowly said, "No need. That way, it won't have the effect of training." After a while, Soren drank a bowl of hot soup to maintain the heat, then took off his underwear and covered his whole body in ice and snow again. The halfling's mouth couldn't help but twitch and murmured, "What a madman." Until night fell. Soren had covered his whole body 4 times in a row. The accumulated frostbite had made his face pale and looked quite weak. Vivian distressed him and told him not to do this, but he waved his hand and said, "It's okay. I can still bear it. It won't delay tomorrow's journey." What a madman. Gloria had a complicated expression, but Soren's self-abuse still made her feel a little shocked. This guy was really stubborn and crazy. Soren covered his whole body under ice and snow again. When the accumulated frostbite was close to 60 points, the prompt finally changed. Training successful. You have received 6 points of frostbite. You have developed a little resistance to cold environments. You have successfully mastered minor cold resistance. Success. As the data appeared, Soren suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his body, and his whole body seemed to have adapted to the cold. Even if his whole body was covered in ice and snow, he didn't feel as cold as before. Minor cold resistance, personal ability. In the process of resisting the cold, you gradually adapted to this environment. You will adapt to most cold climates, and your resistance to special cold environments has also increased. From now on, you are immune to any cold damage below 1 point. When you are attacked by spells or spell-like spells, any cold damage will be reduced by 1 point. Prerequisite: Constitution of at least 16 points. Soren's face quickly regained its color. He used a spell to dry his whole body and then put on his clothes. This change could be said to have happened in a short time, and the 2 people next to him were stunned. At first, Soren's whole body was stiff and pale, but now it was as if nothing had happened. The halfling's fingers trembled and murmured, "This works?" Aladdin's face showed an eager expression, but in the end, he gave up. He was afraid that he would freeze to death. In the past, Soren swam in the ice river, and it took him a few days to master minor cold resistance. Now that he had extraordinary constitution and the ability to regenerate, he could challenge more difficult training methods. This ability was harder to improve as he progressed. If he wanted to strengthen it to minor cold resistance, he would need to enter some special geographical environment. Conservatively speaking, minor cold resistance would accumulate more than a few hundred points of frostbite. Without the help of a priest, it would be difficult to succeed in a short time. Immunity to 1 point of cold damage, this effect didn't seem like much, but it could save his life in a critical moment. When it was upgraded to a higher level, it was also very effective against all kinds of spells. Many northern warriors had a weak resistance to the cold due to their natural living environment, which was why Gloria was more resistant to the cold. The most difficult thing to train was fire resistance, because it couldn't be trained directly by a fire. Only slow damage could produce the training effect, and it could also allow the body to gradually adapt and develop the corresponding resistance. Soren once trained his fire resistance in a volcanic environment for a long time, and he finally advanced after falling into the lava. The easiest thing to train was poison resistance, but the process was more painful and took more time. Soren didn't have time to train yet. The next day, Soren was obviously much more relaxed, and the bone-chilling wind's influence on him had completely disappeared. The halfling also tried to resist the cold, but he didn't dare to be as crazy as Soren. He just wore his clothes in the snow, and when he came out, his lips were trembling. But there was still some effect. At least his body gradually adapted to the cold climate, and it wasn't as difficult as it was at the beginning. If he wanted to learn the ability, minor cold resistance, it would take at least a long time, but the short-term training effect had already allowed him to adapt to the colder weather like the northerners. The group trekked for 3 days. Soren carried Vivian for more than 100 kilometers. When the surrounding trees began to become clear, and the traces of the road became more and more obvious, they knew that they were about to reach the elves' territory. This was a place blessed by the gods, just like the snow in autumn fall was thinner than outside. There would always be a trace of power in places where the gods were concerned. Otherwise, the gods who controlled other areas could casually send disasters, such as the goddess of pestilence and the goddess of disease. When they spread plagues and diseases, the fear of mortals could also strengthen their power. There was no shortage of believers in this world who prayed out of fear. The snow on the road was getting less and less, and there were more and more animals moving around. Soren saw some marks carved on the trees, which were left by the elves' patrol team. The elves were more repulsive to other creatures, but they were not obviously hostile. It was not easy to enter their territory, but it was also not very difficult. In the afternoon of the same day, they saw the elven village. In fact, it was not as beautiful as they imagined. It was just a relatively delicate tree house. They also knew how to cut wood to build houses. The glory of the High Elves had passed. They were destroyed along with the Arcane Empire, and the remaining elves were just a little more elegant than other creatures. The elves' appearance was more beautiful and handsome, but not to the extent of being astonishingly beautiful. It was just that the overall level of the elves was a little higher than the humans. Vivian looked around curiously. The elven guards in the village warned them not to cause trouble, and then let them in. The elven villages in the outside world were more closely connected to other creatures. The deeper they went into the forest, the stricter the inspection was, especially near the elven capital. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter. There were still humans and half-elves living here, but their numbers were relatively small. The elves also knew how to farm, and they could not feed so many people by relying on the supply of nature. The village was surrounded by a clear river, and there were also open farmlands nearby. Ordinary elves were not that elegant and noble. They were not born professionals. Their strength also needed to be improved through training. The most eye-catching thing was a big tree. Every elven village had such a big tree. It was the legendary ancient tree guard, challenge rating 12. However, it was still in a deep sleep. P.S. It's too cold to write at night in winter. I've only just finished my morning update, so I didn't wake up as early as before. Today's update will be released before 5 a.m. Chapter 103. Soren first settled down Vivian. The little girl looked around curiously. She was curious about everything in front of her. Aladdin was also a restless person. When he saw a fruit that he had never seen before, he would secretly take two. Most rogues were not very honest. The elves were the race that planted the most fruits. Basically, they had fruits all year round. Here, the fruits would be sliced and brought to the main table. Nearly a third of the elves were vegetarians. Occasionally, they would put some meat on the table. The other elves usually ate the same diet as humans. Gloria seemed to be in a good mood. She held a red fruit and played with it, but she didn't seem to want to take a bite. Soren first walked around the village, and then looked at the big tree from afar. The ancient tree guardian didn't allow others to get close to it. There was a circle of fences around it, and it would arouse the hostility of the elves. This was a supernatural creature with a challenge rating of 12. It gave more than 10,000 slaughter EXP, but it was quite difficult to kill. The ancient tree guardian was born with a bonus of 12 HP, and its basic HP was increased by 1 HP every year. This ancient tree guardian in front of him had at least 400 to 500 HP, basically, it wouldn't be killed by fire, and it might even turn into a burning angry ancient tree. That was just too awesome. They were a life form similar to the air and fire elementals. This kind of life form was easy to mutate, advanced mutation. The elves sold high-quality bows, exquisite jewelry, and handicrafts to the outside world. These things were very popular with the nobles. They needed to import food, iron products, cloth, and so on. The way of living in isolation and self-sufficiency had long disappeared hundreds of years ago. Only some elves who adhered to traditional teachings would live in the depths of the forest. This place was not far from Soren's goal. The team was a little tired after 3 days of trekking. Today was definitely a day to rest. Tomorrow, he was going to talk to Gloria about his plan. The night passed quickly. The next day, everyone gathered in Soren's room. When they heard Soren's words, their eyes were obviously brighter. Wait. Aladdin clapped his hands excitedly and said in a low voice, "Are you saying that there is a hidden treasure somewhere nearby? But there are monsters guarding the area, so you need our help?" "No problem. Aladdin loves treasures the most. After we find them, I want a share of the spoils." Gloria also seemed to be very interested in the treasure hunt. She gently lifted the ends of her hair. Because she had been wearing a veil, her expression could not be seen. However, from her demeanor, it could be seen that she was quite interested in this matter. There were many treasures in this world, but the ones that were truly valuable were scattered and hidden. Even the high-grade witches would have a strong desire for those treasures. However, when she heard Soren's location, she frowned and asked, "Over there?" "Legend has it that there is a dragon nearby." Aladdin's expression froze for a moment. Then, there was no worry on his face. Instead, he said excitedly, "Is it a dragon's den? Wouldn't that make his wealth even more shocking? Just like in the legends, are we going to steal the dragon's treasure?" Gloria frowned and said softly, "With our strength, going to the dragon's den is just suicide. There must be an adult dragon there." Soren gently shook his head and explained, "Of course it's not a dragon's den. That place is too dangerous. The location of the treasure is dozens of kilometers away from the dragon's den. That dragon is still sleeping and is not a threat to us. Moreover, it is a metal dragon, not a relatively evil chromatic dragon. My target is near a canyon. There are active earth elementals there. In the canyon, there is an elemental altar. Below it is the treasure we are looking for. There should be a lot of valuable things inside." There was a metal dragon on the elf side. It seemed to be an adult copper dragon. However, it would still sleep for 1 or 2 years. It would only wake up during the time of troubles. The Seal of the 4 Elements was a legendary level quest. The reward was naturally not only legendary level equipment, but also extremely valuable gems and tools. The earth elementals would condense a kind of core. It was an important tool for making clay golems and stone golems. After digging it out, it could be easily sold at a high price of more than 500 kindler. Simply put, Even if they deducted the very special legendary level equipment, the profit of this adventure would be more than 15,000 Kindler. Divided among the three of them, there would be 5 or 6,000 Kindler. It was more than 10 times more than an ordinary adventure. Very good. The halfling clapped his hands. He was quite enthusiastic about making money. He asked, "When do we leave?" "If we leave in the next 2 days, I'll need to prepare some gadgets. According to the old rules, we are now an adventurer team. Since you are the one who provided the location of the treasure, you should be responsible for leading the team. In the end, you get 10% more of the profits. No problem, right?" During this period of contact, they had learned a lot about each other. However, the halfling was still very concerned about the distribution of the spoils. There was a universal old rule among adventurers. The person who provided the location of the treasure could get 10% more, and the other members had to get at least 10%. The amount of distribution was determined by their contribution in battle, but in most cases, it was balanced after making up for the consumption. Adventurers sometimes formed temporary teams. After all, there were very few fixed teams. There would always be people who retired and left. Sometimes, the difficulty of the mission would lead to too few people to complete it. Soren would occasionally find some temporary teammates. He used to deal with people from the evil faction. Although these people were quite bad, there were many who were trustworthy. Only a few would stab someone in the back. The halfling in front of him was undoubtedly more reliable than them. He came into contact with the drows the most. These guys were sinister, cunning, vicious, and cruel. However, Soren had fought side by side with them hundreds of times. It was common for them to be selfish, but there were not many cases of betrayal. There was even a time when he thought that the drows were easier to deal with than humans. As long as you understood their rules, you could even win their respect. Of course, it would be best if you showed enough evil and insidious. If you looked kind and easy to bully, they would be happy to plot on how to quietly kill you. The group was discussing when to leave. But at this time, Vivian's small figure stood up and said with a firm look, "Brother, I want to go too." Astonishment. Soren was obviously stunned for a moment, then he denied, "This mission is very dangerous." "What are you going to do?" "I'll put you in a very safe place." The little girl did not speak. She just looked at him with a firm look. He felt inexplicably guilty, as if he had done something wrong. "Hey." Aladdin covered his forehead and muttered, "You're only 8 years old. You want to go on an adventure?" "This is too." Vivian glared at him and retorted, "Aren't you just a little taller than me? If you can go on an adventure, why can't I? Besides, I'm much stronger than before." The halfling was speechless for a moment. He compared the height of the two and found that they were indeed a little taller. Gloria was obviously stunned for a moment, then she frowned and fell into deep thought. She slowly said, "Maybe Vivian can go with us. After all, she has to choose her own path. We can guide her, but she has to walk the path herself. She will have to face too many things in the future. It's good for her to sharpen herself now. Besides, I can protect her." Gloria's words were obviously biased towards Vivian, which immediately attracted the little girl's grateful eyes. Soren frowned and glared at the northern witch, then continued with a pale face, "No. It's too dangerous. You have problems moving around in the forest by yourself. What can you do if I take you with me?" The little girl's eyes were obviously watery. She stubbornly turned her head and did not look at him. "That's right." Gloria suddenly said, "I forgot to tell you. Vivian is now a level 3 warlock and a level 2 wizard." "What?" Both of them showed a shocked expression. Soren's expression was a little better. After all, he knew about Vivian's amazing talent. However, the halfling's expression was quite exaggerated. He pointed at the little girl in front of him, showing a look of disbelief, and murmured, "She's a warlock? Or a wizard? Then wouldn't she have a lot of spell slots in the future?" In fact, he did not say this sentence because the little girl in front of him had subverted his previous worldview. The spell slots of wizards and warlocks were calculated separately. Wizards relied on their memory to obtain spell slots, while warlocks relied on their talent to obtain spell slots. Warlocks who were also wizards were quite rare. This was because the requirements for talent were extremely high. However, those who succeeded often had more spell slots than others, and could also help the warlock master the number of spells. To put it simply, after the collapse of the magic net, all spellcasting professions would be converted into mana. Wizards' mana was converted according to their intelligence and profession level, priests' mana was converted according to their wisdom and profession level, and warlocks' mana was converted according to their charm and profession level. Therefore, warlocks' and wizards' mana was converted directly from intelligence, charm, and profession level. It was much higher than wizards of the same level. However, because the two professions' levels were reduced, it would be more difficult to master high-level spells. For example, Vivian now had 2 level 1 spells and 1 level 2 spell slot from her warlock level. At the same time, she also had 2 level 1 spell slots from her wizard level. PS1. The last few paragraphs took a long time to find information, which caused the writing to be much slower. The third update will be at night. PS2. The magic net can be understood as a website. If wizards want to access it, they have to manually connect to the network and enter the URL. Warlocks, on the other hand, have automatic dialing. The front page of the browser is the magic net, and a few bookmarks will automatically appear with every upgrade. However, no matter who wants to access the page of legendary spells, they will be shown a 404 error. Magic Net Seal. Chapter 104. This. Soren looked very hesitant. From his point of view, it was necessary for Vivian to familiarize herself with combat. Since the upcoming chaotic period was unprecedented, it was necessary for her to learn how to protect herself. However, from a personal point of view, Soren didn't want her to take risks. He also thought that it was too early for her to do so. After all, she was only 8 years old this year. Letting an 8-year-old girl go into combat? Gloria seemed to understand Soren's hesitation. She looked at the others and said softly, "Vivian. Let them see your spells." The little girl nodded and looked around. She then whispered, "Do I cast it here?" Gloria raised her hand and set up a spell barrier. She then pointed at the wall and said, "Cast it there." Vivian nodded. Then, under the shocked gazes of the others, she pointed at the wall and an arcane missile appeared at her fingertips. Without any incantations or gestures, the arcane missile instantly hit the wall and left a 3-centimeter deep dent. However, this was just the beginning. A series of BAU, BAU, BAU spells appeared. 8 arcane missiles appeared in a row. The first 4 directly hit the wall, and the last 4 hit the empty space outside the wall, leaving a dent more than 10 centimeters deep. Instant cast? Soren's expression was very interesting. He couldn't believe it. Vivian didn't chant any incantations, but she cast 4 spells in a row. The power of 8 arcane missiles was equivalent to the higher-level lesser missile storm. Soren silently calculated his own abilities. He was surprised to find that he didn't even have a chance to attack Vivian. He would be severely injured by her 4 instant cast arcane missiles in a second. How is this possible? How did my sister suddenly become so strong that I can't even defeat her? Soren's expression was a little sluggish. The halfling's mouth was so wide open that an apple could fit in it. Gloria smiled proudly and said slowly, "Because there wasn't enough time, Vivian only learned 1 or 2 simple spells. However, with her talent, it's still very easy for her to deal with some ordinary enemies. When casting arcane missiles, even I can't compare to her. I have to say, she's a genius." Missile storm killing style. It was a very popular fighting style among the wizards because it only required the prerequisite ability, spellcasting. Arcane missile was the fastest spell to cast. No other spell could be faster than it because it only took 1 second to cast it. This fighting style required a long time to practice the ability, spellcasting. Basically, there were no other requirements. It was also commonly known as the brainless Bayubiubiu fighting style. A level 9 adept could have 4 level 1 spell slots, and each arcane missile could generate 5 energy bullets. In other words, 20 energy bullets could be fired in 1 second, which was equivalent to the maximum effect of a level 4 spell, lesser missile storm. If used together with the meta magic ability, Empower spell, all the level 2 spell slots could be stored into level 1 arcane missile. At the same time, with the meta magic ability, Maximize spell, all the level 3 spell slots could be stored into level 1 arcane missile. If there was also the ability, Instant Cast, the level 4 spell slots could also be used to store arcane missile. These 3 metamagic abilities were used to strengthen the power of spells. However, it required an additional increase in spellcasting ability and level. To strengthen the effect of a level 1 spell, a level 2 spell slot was needed. To expand the effect to the limit, a level 3 spell slot was needed. To make the spell instant cast, a level 4 spell slot was needed. The legendary brainless missile storm style was such an extreme way of fighting. Wizards who used this fighting style were extremely violent and also extremely fragile. Their explosive lethality could frighten people to death, but their ability to fight for a long time was quite poor. They were once jokingly called men who only fight for 1 second. For a long time, wizards who used this fighting style would win in 1 second. They would either use the missile storm to completely kill the enemy, or they would be killed by the enemy and lose their spellcasting ability. It was very strong, but also very fragile. It was suitable for dealing with a single person. When faced with 2 people, it would be over in an instant. The lethality of arcane missile was relatively limited. It could be reduced by constitution. If the spell power was not high, 1 arcane missile would at most deal 5 damage. 20 arcane missiles would deal 100 damage. Warriors above level 10 basically had hundreds of HP. With armor and shield blocking, they could at least resist 5 to 10 arcane missiles. Therefore, if one wanted to use the missile storm to kill a high-grade warrior, they had to completely memorize the arcane missile's spell slots. It was hard to say with this fighting style. Because there were spells that could neutralize the energy of the arcane missile, such as shield. There were also many equipment that could reduce the damage of the arcane missile by more than 50%. There were also some skills that could avoid the damage, such as the thief's shadow jump. As long as they avoided the attack for a second, they would not be damaged at all. Soren could not evaluate the effectiveness of this fighting style, but it was excellent for a surprise attack. Of course, after the attack, there would be no fighting power. Oh. Vivian withdrew her white little finger, looked at Soren timidly, and whispered, "I've used up all my spells. There's only 1 level 2 spell left." That's right. It was just a matter of 1 second. Vivian used up all her level 1 spells, and then she punched a hole in the wall and left a 10-centimeter deep hole in the ground. Her powerful innate attribute gave her an extremely high spell power. If combined with the spellcasting genius ability, the power of her arcane missile was close to that of a grade 3 wizard, but there were not as many of them. In the future, when her profession level increased, the number of arcane missiles she could cast would also increase to 5, which was the maximum number of spells she could cast. Oh my god. The halfling reached out and touched the hole in the wall, then looked at the hole outside and murmured, "I can't even last a second against a little girl. Should I go back to farming?" It seemed that Soren was not the only one who was shocked. The halfling next to him was also shocked. Dodging the arcane missile was as difficult as dodging a bullet. It was very difficult for non-legendary level professions to do it. Although she used up most of her spell slots in one go, this kind of lethality was something that even Soren and the halfling next to him could not withstand. In just half a month, Vivian actually had the ability to seriously injure or even kill them in an instant. Soren was silent. He also did not know how to evaluate Vivian's combat power. He could say that she was strong. Her explosive power was indeed amazing, but it was a one-hit battle style. After casting the spell, it was useless. He could say that she was not strong. If she used it at the right time, she could directly injure or even kill an enemy. At a critical moment, she could even save the world. In the past, wizards who used this kind of fighting style were both loved and hated. Many people were hesitant to cooperate with them. When she used her explosive power, it was scary. After the fight, you had to protect her to memorize the spell. Restoration. Gloria gently waved her hand and repaired the damaged wall. Then she looked at Soren and slowly said, with Vivian's ability, she should be able to help. After all, she is not an ordinary child. You should let her learn more. This can train her will, and it will be very helpful for her future. Soren continued to be silent. He was silent for a while, then he sighed and said, "All right. This time, I'll let Vivian go with me. But you must protect her." The little girl's face instantly showed a happy and excited smile. She suddenly jumped into Soren's arms and hung on him like a koala. She kissed him on the cheek and said with a smile, "Big brother is so good. Vivian will be very obedient. She will never run around." Gloria nodded solemnly, then waved her hand to let the little girl come over. She put an exquisite badge on her chest and whispered a few words in her ear. As a high-grade northern witch, Gloria obviously knew the drawbacks of this way of fighting, but it was undoubtedly the most suitable way of fighting for a little girl. After all, at her current age, she could not use many of the methods of wizards. The fighting style of a high-grade spellcaster required not only a lot of knowledge, but also a lot of experience. Now, she should first familiarize herself with some simple and violent fighting styles. The matter was settled. There was an extra little girl in Soren's battle lineup. Although she was not very eye-catching, she was not to be underestimated. Chapter 105. Inside the Dark Forest. Soren carried Vivian on his back and moved forward. Gloria followed behind with light steps, and Aladdin was in front of them. The halfling didn't have much of an opinion about the addition of an 8-year-old girl to the adventurer team. After all, they had all seen Vivian's terrible explosive power. A round of arcane missiles could instantly kill a lot of enemies and could save lives at a critical moment. Even if the arcane missiles were used up, Vivian still had 9 level 0 spells and 1 level 2 spell, which could provide a lot of support. Soren didn't expect that the little Vivian could grow so fast. It seemed that she was most likely the child of God. This was because she learned and memorized spells faster than Soren. The group trekked in the forest for a day, and by noon the next day, they were close to the location of the elemental portal. This was a portal left behind many years ago. Its location was relatively hidden, in a canyon near the Emerald Mountains. From the moment they arrived near the portal, the number of trees and weeds gradually decreased. Too much elemental energy would also affect the growth of plants. This was because too much elemental energy of a single type would form an effect similar to a domain, gradually repelling other elements. The land here was a little dry, and there were weathered rocks everywhere. There were also some sculptures left from a long time ago. These were the sculptures of the spirit of the earth, a high-level earth element. It was also the spiritual incarnation of the legendary earth. They usually slept deep underground, and only some special methods could awaken them and summon them to the surface. After the group entered the canyon, their expressions became serious. Soren put Vivian down and let her walk behind with Gloria. At the same time, he pulled out his curved sword and looked around vigilantly. Aladdin held a short sword in his hand and walked lightly with his feet, always observing the movements around him. How powerful were spellcasters? Looking at the 2 spells that Gloria released, he understood. As she chanted a spell, a magic aura fell on everyone. Greater agility. Agility was also known as Cat's Grace. Its effect was to temporarily increase agility by 4 points, up to a maximum of 25 points. Ordinary Featherweight was a level 2 spell and belonged to the category of single-target buffs. However, Gloria's spell was a level 6 spell and could be used for group buffs. The duration of the spell was also twice as long as Ordinary Featherweight. Soren's agility was boosted to 24 points, while Aladdin's agility was boosted to 25 points. After all, he was a purebred rogue, and his profession level had reached above level 10. His agility would definitely not be lower than his haste. When the second ray of light fell, Soren's movement speed had doubled. His normal sprinting speed had completely surpassed that of an Olympic champion, reaching a speed of 4 to 5 seconds per 100 meters. At the same time, his attack speed was also much faster than before, and the number of times he could swing his sword in a second had increased by at least 1. This spell was also a group buff. The number of people affected was determined by the level of the caster, and the duration was determined by the strength of the spell. Gloria stopped after casting the 2 spells, and casually cast an energy barrier on herself and Vivian. After that, there was basically nothing for them to do. Spellcasters were just that cool. Only when they encountered a situation that they could not resist would they continue to cast spells to turn the tables. Aladdin was quite excited as he stretched his muscles and bones. Then, he jumped 4 or 5 meters away. After landing, he turned around and directly jumped onto the cliff. He ran 7 or 8 steps on the wall like acrobatics, and then lightly landed on the ground. He said happily, "It's really been a long time since I cooperated with a wizard. I really miss the days when I was buffed by spells." Soren was also stretching his muscles and bones to adapt to the speed and agility after the spell buff. It took time to adapt to the sudden increase in agility, otherwise, it would be easy to deviate in battle. However, they were all experienced rogues, and after a little exercise, they grasped the extent of the spell buff. These 2 spells were the most commonly used spells by wizards to buff rogues. They could greatly improve their agility and combat explosiveness. Gloria nodded gently, looked at them and said, "Let's finish this quickly. These 2 spells can only last for half an hour." Half an hour was enough. Soren made a gesture to Aladdin next to him, and then the 2 of them moved forward from the east and west. Experienced rogues could replace warriors. At their level, rogues' ability to fight head-on was not bad. Aladdin made a gesture, and then rushed into the valley. He raised his hand and threw out a hidden weapon. Elementals did not have any fatal weaknesses, and they did not have any vital organs. Undead could hit the spine and soul fire to achieve the effect of a fatal blow, but elementals could only exhaust the life energy in their bodies bit by bit. This group of creatures was immune to backstab. Of course, it was not absolute immunity. Just like when fighting against a lich, if you could hit the soul fire in its eye socket, you could also achieve the fatal damage of backstab, but the difficulty of achieving it was simply too high. To deal with these elementals, you had to accurately hit their elemental core, which was usually in a certain position in their body. The requirements for strength and weapons were extremely high. With the current equipment of Soren and Aladdin, it was basically impossible to penetrate the body of an elemental. Many supernatural creatures could only launch a fatal blow by hitting a certain point. Only the effect of fatal blow could be combined with backstab. This required the legendary ability, Insight into Weakness. Asterisk rumble. Asterisk with a dull sound, a 3-meter-tall monster was lured out. It looked like a human made of mud and stones. It had 4 limbs, a torso, and a head. However, its head was just a piece of rock, and the outline of its face could be vaguely seen. The weight of the earth elemental was more than half a ton. Every step it took left deep footprints on the ground. Its momentum was like a bulldozer, flattening all the stones in its way. Asterisk clang. Asterisk Soren raised his hand and threw out a throwing knife, but it was deflected by the solid rock in front of its chest. It only left a shallow mark on its body. It could not break through its defense. Fighting against elementals was such a disgusting thing. The earth elemental had a layer of natural elemental armor, which made it immune to all physical damage below 10 points. There was no doubt that it was like throwing rocks at them. The only difference was that this rock was bigger and fiercer. Earth elemental, grade 4, challenge rating, level 9, monster level, 15, has spell-like abilities, highest and lowest attributes, 22 and 10, total attribute points, 90-100, special abilities, elemental armor, bash, elemental trait, earth throw, challenge difficulty, A-. It was not a joke that it was twice as strong as the snake demon from the abyss. Just the A difficulty alone was enough to prove how difficult it was to deal with this kind of elemental creature. Soren and Aladdin pounced at the earth elemental from the left and right. They nimbly twisted their bodies and leaped, dodging the earth elemental's waving arms. The two jumped up at the same time and swung their weapons at the earth elemental's weak points. Part of its body was made of mud. Its limbs were made of rock, but its joints were made of mud. Clang! 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 Soren's curved sword flashed in a cold light as he dodged the earth elemental's waving arms. The enemy's reaction speed was slower. A row of battle data appeared. Target hit. You have attacked the earth elemental 3 times. Dealt 5, 4, 3 points of physical damage. You have successfully enraged the target. Soren's hand was slightly numb. After cutting through the mud, he hit a rock. The impact was not small. It was like fighting with a rock. There wasn't even the slightest bit of pleasure from cutting flesh and bones with a knife. Aladdin's nimble figure also landed on the ground from the side. He circled around the earth elemental and seized the opportunity to jump up and stab the enemy's arm joint. The two's weapons were still of high quality and did not bend. But after this battle, no one knew. Attack the joints of the left and right legs. Soren shouted in a low voice. He passed through the gap between the earth elemental's legs and swung his curved sword at the enemy's knees. It was made of soft mud. As long as a supernatural creature maintained a human form, it would follow the basic rules. Without legs, it would not be able to move. Clang! 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 A series of sparks appeared. The two were like butterflies flying through flowers. In just 1 or 2 minutes, the earth elemental's knees were hit more than 10 times. Finally, it reached a critical point and the earth elemental's legs broke. But what surprised Soren was that without its legs, it could still move with its legs. However, its balance and movement speed were greatly reduced. At least they had achieved their goal of attacking. Soren hit it a total of 12 times. The accumulated damage was about 60 points. Aladdin's attacks might be a little more, but his damage was not as high as Soren's. The earth elemental's level was 15, and a conservative estimate was that it had 150 basic HP. As a supernatural elemental, it also had an additional 100 or so HP. In other words, its HP could be close to 300 points, which was more than many high-grade warriors. The earth elemental did not pose much of a threat because of its reduced mobility. But the two of them surrounded it and hit it. It took them about 100 hits to finally disperse the elemental energy on its body. Soren signaled for the halfling to stop. In the end, he successfully finished off the earth elemental in front of him. Both of their weapons were bent, but the rewards were not small. Hit successful. You dealt 4 damage to the earth elemental. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You received 2550 slaughter EXP. Chapter 106. This feeling was just too unbearable. Without rare-grade weapons, fighting against supernatural beings was like cutting meat with a blunt knife. It was even more unbearable than this. Soren and Aladdin looked at each other. Both sides looked at each other's slightly curled weapons and showed a helpless expression. There were very few rare-grade equipment, especially suitable weapons. Most of the time, they had to find someone to customize them. Occasionally, the rare-grade weapons in the market were all common goods, which were not very useful for rogues like them who valued skills. Warriors had much lower requirements for weapons. Brother. When the battle was over, Gloria took Vivian's little hand and walked over. The little girl followed behind obediently. When she saw Soren's slightly curled weapons, she whispered, "Let me help you fix it." Repair. This was the most commonly used level 0 spell by wizards. As the little girl's white finger pointed, a very weak magic aura appeared, and then Soren's blade was repaired, almost returning to its original appearance. Repair was a very useful level 0 spell. It could be used to repair most non-rare grade equipment. Of course, it was the kind that was not completely damaged. If the wizard's strength was very high, they could also do things like Gloria and completely repair the messy room furniture with a snap of their fingers. Vivian had a lot of level 0 cantrips. She had twice as many spells as other low-grade adepts. The halfling had just taken out a whetstone from the bag and was about to sharpen his dagger, but after seeing Vivian cast a spell, he immediately handed over the weapon with a smile and said, "Little girl, can you fix it for me too?" "Okay." Vivian nodded gently, then stretched out her white finger. The dagger in the halfling's hand was quickly repaired, but in such a short time, Vivian had used 2 level 0 spell slots. The spell slots of low-grade spellcasters were never enough. As the elemental energy within the earth elemental's body was dispersed, the corpse of the earth elemental quickly weathered away. Its rocky body gradually collapsed and scattered on the ground like sand. At the same time, a pitch-black obsidian-like stone was revealed. Aladdin quickly pulled out the soil and sand, took the dark stone with a smooth surface, and directly handed it to Soren. He asked, "This thing is worth 500 Kindler coins?" "Yes." Soren nodded, reached out and took the elemental core, then put it in front of Gloria and said, "You should have studied golems. Can you see its quality?" The quality of such an elemental core was determined by the strength of the earth elemental. Most earth elementals were level 15, but there were also some level 16 and 17 earth elementals. The higher the level of the elemental core, the better the quality, which could be used to make better golems. Gloria took a look at it, and a faint magic light appeared on her fingertips. She then said, "The quality should be above average. In the north, it can be sold for 700 to 800 Kindler coins. The most common elemental cores in the north are water elemental cores and wind elemental cores. The demand for other elemental cores is higher. Naturally, the price was different in different regions. In the south, it was about 500 Kindler coins, but in the north, it could be as high as 700 to 800 Kindler coins. It's that valuable? A diamond is only about 500 to 600 Kindler coins, right?" The halfling's eyes immediately emitted a golden light, and the tired look he had after the battle disappeared without a trace. In an instant, he seemed to be full of energy. He said excitedly, "Then let's continue. I just saw that there were more than 10 earth elemental cores inside. Altogether, it's worth about 8,000 to 9,000 Kindler coins." Soren also stood up. The earth elemental just now gave him 2550 slaughter EXP, and the other earth elementals should be about the same. If he killed all of them, he should be able to get about 30,000 slaughter EXP. This was the only opportunity in the early stages where he could restrain the monsters. At the same time, he could challenge them without too much risk. In the future, there would be very few opportunities to farm slaughter EXP like this. After all, elementals rarely appeared in the material plane. Among the 4 major elementals, he could only suppress the slow earth elemental. The agility of the earth elemental was 10 to 12 points, and its strength and constitution were close to 20 points, or even above 20 points. Soren's extraordinary agility completely restrained it. As long as he was careful enough and did not rush for quick success, he would not be hit. This was just like how Soren did not dare to fight with the ogre in the beginning. The difference in a single attribute was too big, and it was easy to suppress the ogre in a certain aspect. Therefore, as long as it was a profession in the legendary realm, they would not allow themselves to have too obvious shortcomings in a certain attribute. Of course, charm was an exception. Recently, the beastly style was popular, and pure men did not care about their charm. Gloria slightly frowned. She looked at the two of them and slowly said, "You're too slow. The spell duration is not enough for you to kill these monsters. The spells I remember are rarely repeated. Without the spell buffs, you will be in danger when fighting the earth elemental." Spell slots. The biggest limitation of wizards, and also the tool to balance the gap between them. Although Gloria had a lot of spell slots, as a high-grade witch, she had twice as many spell slots as other wizards. However, she also had to retain her memory of life-saving spells, defensive spells, combat spells, and control spells. Like the buff spells just now, she must have only memorized one or two. She would not waste a lot of spell slots on them. Without the buff spells, they would not be able to form an absolute suppression of attributes. If they were not careful, they might really be hit by the earth elemental once or twice. Just by looking at the size of the earth elemental, one would know that it would be very painful. What else? Aladdin looked at the others and whispered, "Let's kill some of them today, and then we'll kill some of them tomorrow after you've memorized the spells." Soren shook his head and said, "It's better to do it today. After all, this place is connected to the elemental plane. If we stay here for too long, it's easy to have accidents." He turned around and looked at Gloria next to him and said in a deep voice, "Do you have any enchanted weapons in your memory?" Gloria frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "This kind of spell is rarely used, so I basically can't remember it. However, I think I have a scroll for enchanted weapons." She was indeed a rich, and beautiful northern witch. She did not even have the intention to remember the enchanted weapons spell that was necessary for a group of losers. This spell was the most frequently used spell by low-grade wizards before they had rare-grade equipment. It was usually used to buff the top burst damage professions in a group. Soon, she took out an inconspicuous spell scroll, opened it and activated it with magic. Then, a magic light fell on Soren's curved sword. In an instant, Soren's originally normal curved sword had become like this: item type, military curved sword +2, temporary enchanted, item grade, rare, grade 2, item description, a weapon made of folded forged steel. Whether it's toughness or strength, it's far superior to ordinary weapons. Only blacksmiths with 150 points of weapon forging skill can forge such a weapon. Requirements: 10 points of strength. Effects: black steel, +2 sharpness, +2 penetration, +1 energy damage. A grade 2 rare weapon was born just like that. Gloria was a high-grade witch, so the effect of the enchantment was much stronger than other wizards. The enchantment directly broke through from grade 1 to grade 2, but the limit was still a grade 2 rare weapon. Only advanced enchanted weapons could be enchanted to a higher level. There were even spells like legendary enchanted weapons, but unfortunately, not many people learned them. Gloria looked at Soren and whispered, "It can only last for 20 minutes. You better hurry up." The enchantment was naturally a temporary enchantment. A real rare weapon was forged with special materials and alchemy. Soren looked at the attributes of the curved sword and suddenly felt a surge of confidence. "It's enough for me to kill them." Aladdin, who was next to him, was envious. He also walked over with 2 short swords and looked up at her with longing. Gloria looked down at the small halfling and said, "There's only one scroll. You'll have to make do with it for now." Aladdin was a little disappointed, but he quickly followed. Soren's weapon was enchanted with a grade 2 rare weapon, so he naturally had to be the main attacker. When the halfling attracted another earth elemental, he immediately rushed over and slashed at the earth elemental's neck. A row of data appeared: target hit. You used a slash attack on the earth elemental. Dealt 7, +2, physical damage. Dealt 1 additional energy damage. You have successfully enraged the target. Although it only dealt 8 points of damage, Soren's damage was doubled after the enchantment. His first slash only dealt about 4 points of damage, and 2 slashes were comparable to 1 slash. As Shurfong twisted his body and swung his sword at the earth elemental rock, the 2 or 3 points of damage he had dealt to the earth elemental rock had now become 6 or 7 points of damage. The earth elemental rock was even left with a 2 to 3 centimeters deep mark. This was the penetration and sharpness effects of a Tier 2 extraordinary weapon. When used against enemies with natural armor, Shurfong could penetrate their armor to a certain extent. Unfortunately, it wasn't the most powerful armor break attribute, or else it could directly cut through the elemental armor like tofu. 6 slashes. Each of Soren's slashes carried an additional 1 energy damage. He continuously slashed the earth elemental's arms 6 times, directly cutting off one of its arms from its shoulder. Soren's combat strength was off the charts with his rare weapon. He didn't even need Aladdin's help. As long as Soren covered him a little, Soren continuously cut off 2 of the Earth Elemental's arms and half of its legs. Finally, he cut off the Earth Elemental's head from its neck. P.S. That's all for today. I'll add more tomorrow. Chapter 107. With 5,000 slaughter EXP in hand, Soren was a little excited. He now had more than 10,000 slaughter EXP, which was enough to level up both his wizard and rogue classes at the same time. However, he still forcibly suppressed this impulse. Leveling up his basic classes could be put aside for now. He didn't need to level up to deal with these Earth Elementals, so it was better to leave it for the future. With his current ability, triggering the advancement was only a matter of time. Even if there were no conditions, he could create them himself, such as advancing into an assassin. There were only 3 prerequisites to become an assassin. The first was 100 points of stealth, the second was Heart of Slaughter, 100 kills, and the last was 50 points of alchemy, poisons. Stealth was already enough, Slaughter Heart was a passive ability, and assassins were cold-blooded and ruthless. As long as the number of targets he assassinated reached 100, he would automatically acquire the ability, Slaughter Heart, which would increase his willpower by 1. Soren had assassinated quite a lot of targets. As long as he was given some time, it would be a piece of cake for him to kill 100 people. As for the last 50 points of alchemy, he would need to spend some time learning how to make poisons. Assassin was one of his priorities for advancing into an assassin, but in the end, he still chose Lurker, which was better at hiding. The NPCs in the storyline had the Apprentice Assassin class. They didn't need the ability, Slaughter Heart, but they had to complete a series of assassination missions to officially advance into an assassin. The battle ended. Just as Soren was about to find the elemental core from the corpse of the Earth Elemental, a row of data suddenly appeared. Battle ended. You dealt 7+2 damage to the Earth Elemental. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You received 2550 slaughter EXP. After killing again and again, your combat skills have become more flexible. You received information about the ability, reflex evasion. You received information about the ability, agile movement. Information about the ability appeared. Soren couldn't help but be stunned. The halfling next to him reached out and patted him, then picked up the elemental core and asked in confusion, "What are you doing?" "Hurry up and kill the next one, there are still a lot of them." Soren quickly came back to his senses and took a look at his own data. He didn't know if it was because of his accumulation or because of the battle just now, but he actually got 2 information prompts at once, both of which were advanced abilities for rogues. If he didn't spend ability points to obtain them, he could only comprehend them through battle. More often than not, the more experienced a person was. Even if they were of the same professional level, they would have more specialties than those who did not fight much. Therefore, even if the 2 of them were of the same level, the difference between them would be like heaven and earth when they fought. Reflex evasion, personal ability. After a long period of combat, your reflexes have been gradually trained. When you encounter a sneak attack, assassination, or surprise attack, you won't appear to be caught off guard, because your trained reflexes are enough to deal with such unexpected situations. You can also rely on your reflexes to avoid the core area of the attack when you are hit by some area of effect attacks or spells. Conditioned reflexes +1, evasion, roll, +5. Flexible movement, personal ability. After repeated battles, your footsteps have become more and more flexible, and you can easily avoid most of the attacks. Your footsteps are like dancing steps in battle. Flexible footsteps are suitable for people like you. When you face an enemy's attack, you can flexibly avoid a lot of damage. Evasion +1, evasion, shifting, +5. These were 2 abilities that Soren was very familiar with. However, he was still quite surprised to get the information of 2 abilities at once. He had fought so many times at the beginning, but he didn't get any information about abilities. Now that 2 abilities appeared at once, it was definitely not a coincidence. It was very likely that there were other reasons. For example, he was now blessed with greater lightness and haste, or he was not hit by the enemy when he was fighting against the earth elementals just now. The more Soren thought about it, the more he felt that the possibility was high. This was because when he was training the sprint ability, he also needed to train with spells. At that time, he was blessed with lightness and greater haste, and then ran on the river to the limit. He fell into the river more than 10 times in a row before he finally mastered the sprint combat ability. Although he had fought a lot in the past, he didn't have the feeling of dancing on the tip of a knife like now. Being hit by the earth elementals was not a joke. Soren was highly focused throughout the whole process. He glanced at the halfling next to him and said in a deep voice, "Let me deal with the next one alone. I feel like I'm about to have a breakthrough in my combat skills." "You can do that." The halfling was startled for a moment and then said, "Are you sure?" Soren nodded. There was a speculation in the past that when one's attributes were high, the speed of learning and mastering abilities would be increased. After all, 15 points of agility and 20 points of agility were two extremes. Many abilities required a corresponding physical condition to master. Soren now had 24 points of agility, which was higher than when he was training to master his abilities. After all, at that time, no spellcaster was willing to waste precious spells to train with his abilities. Wizards like to buff themselves with ingenious wisdom when learning high-grade spells, because high intelligence would help with the efficiency of learning spells. He might have reached the critical point of a breakthrough in his ability. The current high attribute state was probably several times more effective than usual, which was why there were 2 ability prompts in a row. 4 points of agility was equivalent to all the free attribute points of an 8-level rogue allocated to agility. It was indeed a bit risky to fight against the earth elementals alone. When Soren lured an earth elemental, he immediately felt the pressure increase. Without the halfling to cover him and attract attention, the frequency of his attacks was greatly reduced. He had to divert more energy to dodge the attacks. In the past, he could seize the opportunity to slash 7 or 8 times in a minute, but now he could only slash 2 or 3 times at most. Gloria seemed to be a little puzzled. After asking the halfling, she understood a little, but she looked at Soren with a strange expression. A breakthrough in battle? This seemed to be something that only legendary figures could do, right? How could Soren be so sure that he could break through his original fighting skills in just a few minutes of battle? Was he also a son of God? It shouldn't be. His talent was only a little better than ordinary people. In some areas, he was close to the level of a genius, but there was still a big gap between him and the amazing talent of a son of God. Clang! 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 Soren attacked again and again. He didn't pursue a short burst of power. He just wanted to make sure that he wasn't hit by the enemy. He moved around the earth elemental. Only when the enemy attacked, would he seize the opportunity to counterattack. After the attack, the earth elemental would pull back its arm. At this moment, there was a 1-second gap between the attack. 1 second was enough for Soren to do a lot of things. He slashed the earth elemental's arm, then suddenly turned around and jumped onto its shoulder. Before landing, he slashed at the enemy's neck with all his strength. The battle was still going on. Soren's movements were obviously much more flexible. He seemed to have grasped the pattern of the earth elemental's attacks, and the rhythm of the battle gradually began to favor him. Clang! 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 When Soren slashed at the earth elemental's neck several times, the enemy's tall body suddenly collapsed. The stone structure of its body began to decay, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into sand and stones. After killing the earth elemental in front of him, he didn't rush to take out the elemental core. Instead, he closed his eyes and recalled the battle just now. Then, he let out a long breath. A notification popped up just now, battle ended. You've dealt 8+2 damage to the earth elemental. Target killed. Extracting soul energy. You've received 2600 slaughter EXP. In the battle just now, you've learned a lot about your own fighting skills. You've received information about the ability, reflex evasion. You've received information about the ability, agile movement. This was already the second notification. According to Soren's past experience, there was at most one more notification before he could master the corresponding ability. That was to say, the next Earth Elemental would likely allow him to master two abilities at the same time. Soren waved his hand again at the halfling beside him. The halfling's expression was obviously a little speechless. However, Soren didn't have the mood to care about this. He took a short breath and excitedly lured the second Earth Elemental. At the same time, according to the rhythm of the attacks just now, he calculated the interval between the Earth Elemental's attacks. Clang. 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 Gloria's expression became a lot more dignified. Soren actually became skillful in just a few minutes. Although the efficiency of the battle wasn't high, he was able to predict and dodge the Earth Elemental's attacks in advance. In the end, he was even able to hit the Earth Elemental's joints before it attacked, thus interrupting the Earth Elemental's next attack. The halfling's expression was already stunned. As a rogue, of course, he knew how difficult it was to do this. Soren's skills actually improved a lot in just a few minutes. Even he was a little surprised. Finally, when Soren killed the Earth Elemental in front of him, the long-awaited notification appeared: the battle is over. You've successfully learned the ability, reflex evasion. You've successfully learned the ability, agile movement. You've received information about the advanced profession, shadow dancer. Advanced requirements: reflex evasion, agile movement, 100 points in sneak, 50 points in evasion. Chapter 108. Did I trigger an advanced profession? I can't believe I actually triggered the advanced profession of shadow dancer. Soren glanced at the others with a hint of joy on his face and said slowly, I've broken through. I feel like I've comprehended some skills. The halfling looked at him as if he was looking at a monster. Gloria's expression was also very strange. In just a few minutes, Soren's combat skills could be said to have improved in a straight line. This was also very surprising for a knowledgeable witch. Only Vivian didn't care about anything. She clapped her white little hands and said with sparkling eyes, Brother is so powerful. Just now, I was completely playing with a monster. Two abilities that increased the ability to dodge. Although they were not as good as the legendary dodge, legendary reflex dodge, and legendary intuition dodge that he once had, it also allowed Soren to find the feeling of being at ease in battle. Even if the process of the battle was very dangerous, he could still find the calm feeling of dancing on the tip of a knife. Abilities could be improved little by little. As long as you understood the most basic ability and had the attributes to master it, it was only a matter of time before you improved it. As the number of battles increased, the basic ability would gradually become a high-grade ability. Ordinary dodge was a comprehensive ability, which was an extension of the agility class such as the rogue. Reflex dodge was adjusted according to the agility value. The higher the agility, the faster the nerve reflex, and the stronger the ability to dodge in sudden situations. Finally, there was intuition dodge. This was the most difficult and the most effective evasion skill. It required a very strong perception ability to predict any dangerous attacks in advance. Monks were experts in intuition dodge. If ordinary dodge was the improvement of the basic skills, then reflex dodge was the instinctive reaction in sudden situations. As for intuition dodge, it was the intuition of the next danger before the enemy launched an attack or was about to launch an attack. Intuition dodge was one of the most difficult abilities to train. Except for the monks and their advanced professions, it would take a long time for other professions to train. Moreover, there was a relatively high perception requirement. In the later stages, one would need to accumulate extraordinary perception. Monks had many evasion skills, and they could also extend the ability, deflect flying arrows. The halfling stared at Soren and muttered, Do you want another one? Soren shook his head and said slowly, I can't. I'm almost at my limit. If I want to improve further, I'm afraid I'll have to accumulate more combat experience. Recently, I've been comprehending something, but I only found the opportunity to break through just now. To be able to comprehend two specialties in one go was already considered a good accumulation. Soren wasn't naive enough to think that he could level up again so quickly. There were strict requirements for his dodging techniques, and he had just reached the critical point of breaking through, which was why he was strengthened by the spell. The body's instinctive reaction was accumulated gradually. The more battles one fought, the stronger the instinctive reaction. In the end, it would develop the ability to dodge subconsciously. Then let's speed up. Gloria looked deeply at Soren, then whispered, "There's only 10 minutes left for the spell." Soren nodded, picked up his curved sword, and entered the canyon. The halfling looked at him enviously, then followed with his short sword. This kind of breakthrough really needed talent. Not even 1 in 100 rogues could break through temporarily. They needed a long time to accumulate. A large altar could be seen in the canyon. It was surrounded by huge stone pillars that were about 10 meters high. The center was divided into 9 steps, and in the center was a stone platform that looked like a compass. The earth elementals on the periphery were a little better, but the earth elementals inside were obviously different. They were larger in size, and there were more rock structures all over their bodies. Even their appearance was closer to that of a human. "Be careful." Soren clenched his curved sword and said in a deep voice, "These earth elementals may be advanced elites. Among them, there may be guys who have learned the skill, earth throw. If you see them grabbing rocks, run away immediately." Earth throw. It was a spell-like ability. The earth elementals could condense energy and throw a boulder. The damage could reach up to 100 points. Being hit by the boulder would result in instant death. Most elementals had no intelligence, even lower than the undead. The intelligent elementals were legendary creatures, such as the Jinn, the Water Jinn, the Earth Jinn, and so on. Such elementals belonged to divine creatures. Many of them were born with the divinity of demigods. Occasionally, they could even summon powerful elemental gods. One of the more famous summoning spells was the legendary Wish. The Jinn would fulfill some of your wishes according to the principle of equivalent exchange, including resurrecting the dead. These were the oldest creatures. Most of them slept in the elemental plane. Most of the elementals that appeared in the material plane had low intelligence. They relied entirely on instinct to move in some areas. Occasionally, they would respond to the summoning of the spellcasters and serve them. The earth elementals in front of them were like this. They had been here for a long time and would not leave the canyon. Soren made a gesture to the halfling next to him. The two once again joined forces to attract the attention of the earth elementals. The halfling was responsible for restraining the enemy while Soren seized the opportunity to deal damage. Gloria glanced at the altar from afar. Her delicate eyebrows slightly wrinkled, as if she was a little uneasy. She looked up at the sky. There seemed to be a falcon circling in the sky. Because the vision in the canyon was not good, she was not sure if it was a wild falcon flying over. Most wizards were very vigilant. Gloria once again cast a protective spell, and then approached the front. A pure-blooded spellcaster would never use up all their spells. They would always leave a few spells to deal with unexpected situations. 1, 2, 3. When Soren dealt with the 9th earth elemental, the situation in the battle suddenly changed. The earth elemental, which was obviously much taller, waved its hand. A huge rock that weighed about half a ton automatically flew into its hand. It suddenly threw the rock at the little mouse that had been harassing it. The huge rock with the whistling sound of the wind was like a black shadow falling from the sky. In an instant, it smashed a deep hole in the ground. Aladdin! Soren shouted, and the speed of his attack slowed down a little. A voice with lingering fear came from behind the rock. The small halfling came out from behind the rock, patted his chest and said, "You scared me to death. Just a little bit more and I would have turned into a meat patty." With the agility of a rogue, it was not difficult to dodge if they were prepared in advance. If it was a warrior, it would be more troublesome. The earth elemental's earth throw could only be used once or twice a day. Soren did not dare to be careless. At the same time, he activated the ability of Shadow Strike. When attacking the advanced earth elemental, there was an additional 6 shadow damage. The shadow energy could directly attack the energy core of the earth elemental. As long as it was successfully touched, it could erode the elemental energy it formed. The halfling seemed to be angered. At the same time, he also activated the energy attack of Shadow Strike. This was the most common spell-like attack for rogues below legend. The advanced earth elemental quickly fell to the ground. After Soren took out the elemental core, he rushed to the altar. The nearby earth elementals were almost killed. Their spell buffs were also about to expire. The scattered earth elementals were still wandering around. They had an alert range. If they did not get close, they would not be noticed. "Where's the treasure?" The halfling excitedly approached the altar and whispered, "It's empty here." "There's nothing here." Soren looked around vigilantly and slowly said, "There should be a secret compartment up there. Don't rush up there. Let me see if there are any traps nearby." After saying that, he walked around the altar a little. There were scattered earth elementals nearby, but it was very troublesome to deal with them without any spell buffs. Although Soren felt that it was a pity to lose the slaughter EXP, it was better not to kill them all. This kind of place connected to the portal was more special. There might be things from the elemental plane coming over. Killing them would easily alarm things like the spirit of the earth. He had suffered a loss because of this before. After killing all the young ones, an old one would suddenly pop up. He quietly made a gesture to the back. Gloria immediately prepared to cast a spell, and Vivian stood nervously next to her. When they passed by a stone pillar, Soren gently pressed on it. Then the altar made a loud rumbling sound, and a secret compartment appeared in front of the others. The portal needed energy to maintain, and most of the sacrifices offered to the elementals were gems. These things would not be exposed outside. Generally, they would be somewhere in the altar. He made a gesture to the halfling next to him. The halfling immediately walked up excitedly, then carefully took out several gems and quickly put them into his pocket. Soren walked slowly along the altar. His figure paused for a moment, then he took out a yellow stone from the left corner of the altar and put it into his pocket in the blink of an eye. It was not very eye-catching, and it did not have any obvious aura. If one did not look carefully, they would even think that it was an ordinary stone. The size of the stone was about the same as a pebble. The surface was quite smooth, but it was heavy when he picked it up. It weighed almost 3 pounds. He got it. Soren immediately looked at the halfling and said in a deep voice, "Take it and leave quickly. The portal here is no longer working. It may alarm the creatures from the elemental plane." The altar made a loud rumbling sound. It seemed that the whole ground had sunk a little. The halfling quickly put things into his multidimensional bag. Fortunately, Kindler did not have many things. Most of them were all kinds of gems. High-grade elementals would sometimes eat them directly, as if they were chewing beans. Dong dong dong. A loud sound came from under the altar. Soren did not care about the rest of the gems. He picked up the halfling and ran out of the altar. There was probably an elemental spirit sleeping below. He hoped that it was not something like the spirit of the earth. My gems." The sorrowful cry of the halfling was still echoing. Gloria had quickly cast a spell, and the 4 figures directly flew out of thin air. Group flight. The altar shook faster and faster, and the center even began to collapse. When Soren and the others flew to a height of about 300 meters, a huge rock arm suddenly stretched out from the ground, followed by a rock giant about 10 meters tall. It made a dull sound, and it looked like it was roaring, but there was no trace of anyone nearby. The huge figure circled around the canyon, and then returned to the bottom of the altar, which had turned into a sand-like ruin. That was close. The halfling wiped his cold sweat, looked at the huge elemental monster, and murmured, "We can't deal with this big guy." Soren's expression was relatively calm, but he could not help but curse in his heart. I knew they were hiding something. How can a legendary level quest be announced so casually? It turns out that there is a guardian below. With more adventures came more experience. In fact, Soren did not believe that a legendary level quest would only have a few earth elementals guarding it. That was why he had arranged for Gloria to walk behind and use flight to leave when necessary. The monster below was probably a rock giant, an advanced branch of the earth elementals. Its strength was only a little lower than the elemental elders, and its monster level was about 18 to 20. This was not something they could deal with. Soren glanced at the canyon from afar, calculating in his heart what kind of strength could safely kill it. This guy must give a lot of slaughter EXP. Chapter 109. Let's get out of here quickly. A gentle wind element made Soren's figure gently land on the ground. It took a lot of energy to maintain group flight. Gloria looked up at the sky and said, "Let's go into the forest first. There's something wrong with that eagle in the sky." The disadvantage of flight was obvious. Without a lot of abilities, it would be extremely weak when flying. Wizards who often flew liked to use feather wing or dragon wing. Directly relying on magic energy to fly was not advisable. Wizards who were not at the legendary level or above would not be able to withstand it. Also, the flexibility and mobility of flying were very poor, and it was easy to become a live target for long-range units. Melee wizards basically had no fighting power in the sky because there was a saying that power comes from the ground. When in the air, it was impossible to use power out of thin air. If the left foot can step on the right foot, then can't we fly to the astral plane? Ugh, Soren looked up at the sky and found a strong falcon hovering in the sky. It had circled around their heads once, but it did not leave. It was still hovering in the sky. This was very unusual. A wild falcon would not fly above their heads for no reason. Aladdin also looked at the sky and muttered, "There's still some time. Why are you in such a hurry? In a second or two at most, I would be able to pick up a dozen more gems. That's thousands of Kindler gems." Soren glanced at him and said coldly, "If you have money, you have to be alive to spend it." The rock giant that just appeared was close to the legendary level. Our attacks couldn't hurt it at all. Even Gloria could only protect herself in front of it. There's no way she could take care of us. This trip is not small. I saw that you just got at least dozens of gems. The halfling laughed and said awkwardly, "I just feel that it's a pity. After all, it's all money." He looked up at the falcon in the sky and followed Soren into the forest. He then opened his multidimensional bag and counted a little. I took about 40 or 50 gems, and there were some Kindler gems in there. But I didn't care about taking them. I first picked something that looked valuable and put it in. How much is it worth? The halfling's valuation ability did not seem to be high. He could not even calculate how much these gems were worth. Don't underestimate the appraise skill just because it wasn't that great. Sometimes, it was really useful. Soren still remembered the time when he teamed up with someone to steal something from a dragon's den, but they only managed to lure the dragon away for less than 10 seconds. In just 10 seconds, his partner had stolen 3 treasures from the 5-meter-tall treasure mountain in the dragon's den, each of which was worth more than 10,000 Kindler coins. This was the effect of appraisal. Adventurers often encountered unexpected situations, and they might not have the time to slowly pick up the loot. Sometimes, they had to grab something and stuff it into their pockets. Whether or not it was worth anything depended on one's eyesight and luck. Soren took a look at the multidimensional bag. There were a lot of gems in it, but the total value was definitely more than 7 or 8,000 Kindler coins, because these were all relatively good quality gems. The elemental plane was rich in gems and minerals. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you could even find obsidian, bullhead gold, open air ore, and so on the surface. Aladdin only got some high-end goods. In addition to the elemental cores he got at the beginning, the 3 of them still had a few thousand Kindler coins. The elemental plane rejected the outside world, and it was difficult for high-grade wizards to enter. It was not as easy to enter as other planes. The fire elemental plane had the most minerals, but the average temperature was about 100 degrees. Professionals with ordinary physiques would be roasted as soon as they entered, and they would be able to smell the fragrance of meat in a while. They could not move around freely without casting spells. Basically, the 4 elemental planes were similar. Although the earth elemental plane was not so harsh, it was a world with supergravity. A weak wizard like Gloria could not walk more than 1 or 2 kilometers. Among the 4 elemental planes, the earth elemental plane was the place where melee legendary professions entered the most. This was because they could use the supergravity of the space to train their strength. However, when they first entered, their combat power would be reduced by more than half. Supergravity field. Gloria glanced at the gems, and soon her eyes lit up. She took out 2 crystal-like gems and slowly said, "I want these 2 things. They are the materials I need. You can divide the rest." "Oh right. Vivian should also take a share. After all, she also contributed today." The little girl looked up at her, and her beautiful big eyes were shining. It seemed that she was also very interested in gems. Aladdin saw that the 2 women were staring at him, and he could not help but rub his forehead and said, "Of course. Of course. Since Vivian is also here, she can also take 10%. This is an old rule among adventurers. A good gem was worth hundreds of Kindler coins. This trip did not encounter too many risks, and he easily earned thousands of Kindler coins. It was enough for him to go back to his hometown and enjoy for a while. Halflings were standard hedonists. They spent at least half of the money they earned to make themselves more comfortable, especially their houses. If they had enough money, they would try their best to decorate their houses with the highest standards. Sometimes, they would even decorate their houses with some high-end art pieces. Soren had been to a lot of places. In terms of living environment, it was estimated that only the elven capital could be compared to the halflings. The elves were a bit of a morbid pursuit of aesthetics, while the halflings were practical and comfortable. That's right. They also had an advantage. When they were guests in the halflings' house, there would always be delicious food. It was quite popular among adventurers to go to the halflings' house to eat. After entering the forest, the falcon lost track of them. The dense forest greatly affected the line of sight. The lush trees were more than 10 meters tall. The group continued to move forward for a while before slowly walking out of the forest. Gloria suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. She frowned and said, "Not good. The falcon is following us again." Soren looked up. Sure enough, he saw a falcon circling above their heads at this moment. It turned out that the falcon did not leave this place. After they entered the forest, it expanded its range and had been patrolling the nearby forest. Now that it saw them, the falcon flew over again. From time to time, it would circle above their heads, making them feel inexplicably uneasy. Soren's face showed a trace of murderous intent. He said in a deep voice, "Can we shoot it down?" Gloria frowned slightly and thought for a moment. She said softly, "It's very difficult. It flies very high, beyond the range of my spells. Also, this falcon seems to be intelligent. Falcons are the overlords of the sky. Even if I use fly, it's very difficult for me to catch up with it. It seems to be a droll's animal companion." The halfling took out something similar to a ruler and measured it. He then said in surprise, "This falcon is not small. It's so far away from us, but we can still see its size. I'm afraid it's close to 4 or 5 meters in size when it falls. This must be a droll's animal companion. Ordinary falcons can't grow to this size." Aladdin had probably studied alchemy. In this world, only alchemists would be more sensitive to this kind of geometric calculation. Rogues would use some small and delicate tools, which could be traps or other traps. The more advanced this kind of thing was, the more delicate it was. Many times, there was no room for mistakes. Gloria stared at the falcon in the sky and said slowly, "Come closer." A group of people walked to her side. Then, she began to chant an incantation. A ray of magical light appeared, and everyone suddenly disappeared without a trace. 10 feet invisibility. Their figures gradually became hazy, and then they disappeared without a trace. The falcon circling in the sky suddenly lost its target and suddenly lowered its altitude a little, but it did not dare to fly low. It let out a loud and clear cry, then rose to its original height and flew in an elliptical trajectory. Soren looked up at the sky and said in a deep voice, "There must be a droll nearby. We'd better leave now." The others looked at each other and quickly left. Shortly after Soren left, a strong figure landed in the forest. It was a tall droll with oil paint on his body. He had not been in contact with people for a long time. The hair on his face was very long, and he did not take care of it. He looked like a savage. Behind him, another agile figure landed. It was a beautiful half-elf droll. A beautiful nightingale landed on her shoulder and carefully combed her feathers. The savage droll looked at the footprints on the ground, then frowned and said, "They escaped. These guys have disturbed the sleeping elements, and the spirit of the earth is also showing signs of awakening. Nightingale, you'd better tell this to the Earth Walker. Only he can appease these angry elements." Chapter 110. There was a slight vibration inside the canyon. It was like a relatively weak earthquake. There was no obvious tremor, but the vibration was real, and it came from the ground at a stable frequency. It felt like a heartbeat, full of rhythm. The remaining earth elementals in the canyon seemed to be in a daze. After a while, they gathered together and drilled into the ground along the altar. No one knew where they went. About 10 kilometers away from the canyon, on the edge of the Emerald Mountains, there was a dragon's den built on a cliff. Most of the locations of the dragon's den were very steep. This was the dragon's first line of defense. It was difficult to reach by normal means because it was surrounded by cliffs. This point was very fake in the tavern stories because the heroes all walked all the way to the dragon's den. In fact, most of the time, to enter the dragon's den, one needed to climb cliffs hundreds of meters high. At this time, many tools were needed. Heavy armor warriors were the most miserable at this time. If there was no spellcasting profession to support flight, it would take a long time to climb up. The geographical factor was only the first trouble. There were many traps near the dragon's den, including very deadly spell traps. If you were unlucky, you would find that the dragon's den was a small maze with many monsters guarding it. These were the dragon's slaves, who worked and provided food for them. But most of the time, only the old dragons would be guarded by monsters. The young dragons were not so confident that they could control those slaves all the time. This was the den of a copper dragon. There were obvious signs of modification around the dragon's den. The dragon had flattened the stone walls near the mountain, making it a vertical 90-degree angle. It was difficult for creatures that could not fly to come up. In front of the den was a large platform. The dragons needed space to take off and land. It was more difficult to flap their wings to fly. When they hunted, they swooped down and then glided into the sky in an arc. A copper-colored dragon was crawling in its lair. It looked almost the same as the legendary dragons. The only special thing was that its forelimbs were thicker, and the color of its pupils was very light. It looked like turquoise. The physical characteristics of dragons were very important because physical characteristics represented their most ferocious physical attacks. Dragon breath was not the most deadly attack. Many spells could resist dragon breath, and so could shields. Experienced high-level adventurers knew that Dragon Wing Strike and Dragon Claw Tear were more dangerous than Dragon Breath. This was originally a sleeping dragon, but now it had woken up. It was lying on top of a pile of treasures that was almost half a story high. A dazzling golden light shone, and its ferocious dragon head looked in the direction of the canyon. Dragons would be very hungry after waking up from their deep slumber. At this time, they would be even more aggressive. It stretched out its long and narrow red tongue and rolled up a metal or the size of a wash basin from the side. Just like that, it crunched it as if it was eating chocolate. Its sharp fangs easily crushed the hard ore. It only took a few seconds for the red copper dragon to gnaw off a piece of ore. Then, it licked its teeth with its long and narrow tongue and said slowly, "Which idiot woke up the spirit of the earth? Are they not afraid of suffering the wrath of the earth?" After gnawing off a piece of ore, the red copper dragon recovered a little energy. It stretched its huge dragon wings and walked out of the nest. In front of the dragon's nest was a platform tens of meters wide, but after it walked out, it still felt that the space was too small. The red copper dragon stood at the top of a steep mountain wall hundreds of meters high and looked down at the land in front of it. This was its territory. The red copper metal scales refracted light in the sun. This ferocious and elegant creature raised its head, then jumped down from the cliff. After diving down for tens of meters, it flapped its dragon wings and rose into the air. In the blink of an eye, it rushed to a height of thousands of meters in the air. An invisible pressure spread out, and the animals that migrated to the vicinity because of the dragon's sleep fled frantically. It didn't even look at the poor reptiles. It flapped its dragon wings and flew to the plains 100 kilometers away. There were strong cleft-hoofed bulls, a mutant of rhinoceros. They could weigh about 3 tons, which was enough for it to have a full meal. In the dark underground world. In a dark red cave, a ferocious creature that looked like a meatball slowly opened its eyes. The walls on all sides were dark red, which seemed to contain some kind of mineral. The creature woke up with a lot of eyes. First, it opened the huge eye in the middle of its head, then the eyes on the tentacles around its head opened. Its eye stalks were segmented like earthworms. Its body was about 5 meters in diameter. None of its body was touching the ground, but the whole sarcoma-like head was strangely floating in the air. There were dozens of tentacles with eyeballs. It was like a dense explosion that made one's scalp tingle. The spirit of the earth has awakened. Its huge mouth was full of sharp fangs. It glanced around with a cold and ruthless gaze, then flew out of the cave. It had been sleeping for more than 10 years. The newly awakened eye demon felt hungry. It had consumed too much energy in order to evolve further. Even its original servants had become food in its mouth. But it didn't matter. As long as it wanted to, it could quickly charm more servants in the underground world. An invisible perceptual web spread out. It wasn't known if it had evolved into an elder eye demon or a giant eye tyrant, but it was definitely a legendary level eye demon that flew out of its nest. Soon, a group of gray dwarves entered its perception range. It flew over quietly without any sound. One of the eyeballs on one of its tentacles shot out a ray of light, and instantly shot through the head of a gray dwarf. The rest of the gray dwarves screamed in horror. Those who tried to escape were instantly killed by the ray, and the rest kneeled on the ground, trembling. The huge eye demon opened its mouth and swallowed half of a gray dwarf's corpse. As it chewed with its bloody mouth, drops of blood and flesh spilled out. Its central eye coldly glanced at the survivors. With a flash of magic, the surviving gray dwarves were all stunned. They respectfully knelt in front of the eye demon and said, "Master." Their dull eyes gradually recovered. The soul imprint of the charm spell had begun to take effect. The gray dwarves' eyes became clear, but they respectfully carried the corpse of their companions and began to serve their new master. Soren and the others went back the way they came from. The halfling was still happily counting the gems. Gloria gently lifted her long hair and looked behind her. Her expression seemed a little strange. Before leaving, she seemed to have felt something. It was an energy wave from the underground. Soren carried Vivian on his back and walked at the back. Suddenly, he seemed to have noticed something. His whole body had goosebumps. His hand unconsciously held the curved sword, and at the same time, he looked up at the sky in the distance. The halfling also felt the same. The gems in Aladdin's hand fell to the ground, and in a flash, he pulled out his dagger. Gloria's body stiffened for a moment. She subconsciously cast an energy shield, and then looked into the distance with her eyebrows knitted. A ferocious and huge figure swept across the sky like a shadow. Soren's expression changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "Red Copper Dragon." It was an adult red copper dragon. It didn't even notice the tiny humans who had cast invisibility on the ground. It had just woken up and was very hungry. The thing it wanted to do the most now was to catch an adult male split-hoofed bull and have a good meal. The whole team was shocked by the flying dragon. All the creatures within the range of the dragon's aura were affected. The only one who was relatively normal was the little girl on Soren's back. She raised her little head and looked at the dragon in the sky and murmured, "It looks so majestic." He didn't know what was going on in Vivian's little head, but there was a longing expression on her cute little face. But at this time, no one paid attention to her. Until the dragon flew past, the others were slightly relieved. Soren couldn't help but quicken his pace. The halfling also put away the gems and trotted forward to catch up with them. It was an adult dragon. It had a legendary challenge rating. They didn't want to meet such a creature now. Behind them, Droll, who was chasing after the dragon, suddenly stopped. He pulled out a feather from his messy hair and quickly chanted a spell. His whole body turned into an eagle in an instant. The eagle spread its wings and soared hundreds of meters in the sky. After glancing at the direction the dragon left, it turned around and flew in the other direction. An adult red copper dragon that was sleeping near the Emerald Mountains had awakened. This matter must be reported to the Earth Walker. Even if the metallic dragons were relatively kind-hearted, they were still very dangerous. All dragons were somewhat temperamental. When they saw a living dragon flying past, no one had the intention to stay. They hurried through the night and finally returned to the original elven village the next day. The village was still very peaceful. No creature would attack the elves at will, because it would attract the revenge of the forest patrol. Not only did it require powerful force to deter the enemy, but it also required some cruel means. When the elves took revenge, there was no elegance to speak of. They were also incomparably bloody when dealing with foreign enemies. Otherwise, the nearby ogres, mixed-blood orcs, and wild monsters would not have migrated to other places one by one. The hands of the elven patrol were stained with blood. The creatures they hunted were definitely not less than Soren. Every race had a group of cold-blooded and ruthless warriors. They were different from the ordinary civilians. Their mission was to fight and kill. Soren and the others finally returned to the inn. The halfling couldn't wait to distribute the spoils of war. Soren got 40%, Aladdin got 30%, Gloria got the first 2 crystals, and only got 3 elemental cores. In the end, even Vivian got 10 gems. The little girl held the gems in front of Soren with a satisfied face. Because her hands were small, she couldn't hold so many gems. However, her face showed a cute expression as if she was presenting a treasure. Soren just gently patted her little head and let her put the gems away. So she smiled and put the gems into an exquisitely embroidered multidimensional bag with silver edges. It was already full of many things. After the distribution, Soren finally had the chance to take a look at the legendary item. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.